Book 5. We have reached the last act of youth's drama, we are approaching its closing scene. It is not good that man should be alone. Emile is now a man, and we must give him his promised helpmeet. That helpmeet is Sophie. Where is her dwelling place, where shall she be found? We must know beforehand what she is, and then we can decide where to look for her. And when she is found, our task is not ended. Since our young gentleman, says Locke, is about to marry, it is time to leave him with his mistress. And with these words he ends his book. As I have not the honor of educating a young gentleman, I shall take care not to follow his example. Sophie, or woman. Sophie should be as truly a woman as Emile is a man, i.e., she must possess all those characters of her sex which are required to enable her to play her part in the physical and moral order. Let us inquire to begin with in what respects her sex differs from our own. But for her sex, a woman is a man, she has the same organs, the same needs, the same faculties. The machine is the same in its construction. Its parts, its working, and its appearance are similar. Regard it as you will, the difference is only in degree. Yet where sex is concerned, man and woman are unlike, each is the complement of the other. The difficulty in comparing them lies in our inability to decide, in either case, what is a matter of sex, and what is not. General differences present themselves to the comparative anatomist and even to the superficial observer. They seem not to be a matter of sex, yet they are really sex differences, though the connection eludes our observation. How far such differences may extend we cannot tell. All we know for certain is that where man and woman are alike we have to do with the characteristics of the species, where they are unlike, we have to do with the characteristics of sex. Considered from these two standpoints, we find so many instances of likeness and unlikeness that it is perhaps one of the greatest of marvels how nature has contrived to make two beings so like and yet so different. These resemblances and differences must have an influence on the moral nature. This inference is obvious, and it is confirmed by experience. It shows the vanity of the disputes as to the superiority or the equality of the sexes. As if each sex, pursuing the path marked out for it by nature, were not more perfect in that very divergence than if it more closely resembled the other. A perfect man and a perfect woman should no more be alike in mind than in face, and perfection admits of neither less nor more. In the union of the sexes each alike contributes to the common end, but in different ways. From this diversity springs the first difference which may be observed between man and woman in their moral relations. The man should be strong and active, the woman should be weak and passive, the one must have both the power and the will. It is enough that the other should offer little resistance. When this principle is admitted, it follows that woman is specially made for man's delight. If man in his turn ought to be pleasing in her eyes, the necessity is less urgent, his virtue is in his strength, he pleases because he is strong. I grant you this is not the law of love, but it is the law of nature, which is older than love itself. If woman is made to please and to be in subjection to man, she ought to make herself pleasing in his eyes and not provoke him to anger. Her strength is in her charms, by their means she should compel him to discover and use his strength. The surest way of arousing this strength is to make it necessary by resistance. Thus pride comes to the help of desire and each exults in the other's victory. This is the origin of attack and defense, of the boldness of one sex and the timidity of the other, and even of the shame and modesty with which nature has armed the weak for the conquest of the strong. Who can possibly suppose that nature has prescribed the same advances to the one sex as to the other, or that the first to feel desire should be the first to show it? What strange depravity of judgment! The consequences of the act being so different for the two sexes, is it natural that they should enter upon it with equal boldness? How can any one fail to see that when the share of each is so unequal, if the one were not controlled by modesty as the other is controlled by nature, the result would be the destruction of both. And the human race would perish through the very means ordained for its continuance. Women so easily stir a man's senses and fan the ashes of a dying passion, that if philosophy ever succeeded in introducing this custom into any unlucky country, especially if it were a warm country where more women are born than men, the men, tyrannized over by the women, would at last become their victims, and would be dragged to their death without the least chance of escape. Female animals are without this sense of shame, but what of that? Are their desires as boundless as those of women, which are curbed by this shame? The desires of the animals are the result of necessity, and when the need is satisfied, the desire ceases. They no longer make a feint of repulsing the male, they do it in earnest. Their seasons of complaisance are short and soon over. Impulse and restraint are alike the work of nature. But what would take the place of this negative instinct in women if you rob them of their modesty? The Most High has deigned to do honor to mankind. He has endowed man with boundless passions, together with a law to guide them, so that man may be alike free and self-controlled. Though swayed by these passions, man is endowed with reason by which to control them. Woman is also endowed with boundless passions. God has given her modesty to restrain them. Moreover, He has given to both a present reward for the right use of their powers, in the delight which springs from that right use of them, i.e., the taste for right conduct established as the law of our behavior. To my mind this is far higher than the instinct of the beasts. Whether the woman shares the man's passion or not, whether she is willing or unwilling to satisfy it, she always repulses him and defends herself, though not always with the same vigor, and therefore not always with the same success. If the siege is to be successful, the besieged must permit or direct the attack. How skillfully can she stimulate the efforts of the aggressor? The freest and most delightful of activities does not permit of any real violence. Reason and nature are alike against it, nature, in that she has given the weaker party strength enough to resist if she chooses. Reason, in that actual violence is not only most brutal in itself, but it defeats its own ends. Not only because the man thus declares war against his companion and thus gives her a right to defend her person and her liberty even at the cost of the enemy's life, but also because the woman alone is the judge of her condition. And a child would have no father if any man might usurp a father's rights. Thus the different constitution of the two sexes leads us to a third conclusion, that the stronger party seems to be master, but is as a matter of fact dependent on the weaker, and that, not by any foolish custom of gallantry. Nor yet by the magnanimity of the protector, but by an inexorable law of nature. For nature has endowed woman with a power of stimulating man's passions in excess of man's power of satisfying those passions, and has thus made him dependent on her goodwill, and compelled him in his turn to endeavor to please her, so that she may be willing to yield to his superior strength. Is it weakness which yields to force, or is it voluntary self-surrender? This uncertainty constitutes the chief charm of the man's victory, and the woman is usually cunning enough to leave him in doubt. In this respect the woman's mind exactly resembles her body. Far from being ashamed of her weakness, she is proud of it. Her soft muscles offer no resistance, she professes that she cannot lift the lightest weight, she would be ashamed to be strong. And why? Not only to gain an appearance of refinement, she is too clever for that, she is providing herself beforehand with excuses, with the right to be weak if she chooses. The experience we have gained through our vices has considerably modified the views held in older times. We rarely hear of violence for which there is so little occasion that it would hardly be credited. Yet such stories are common enough among the Jews and ancient Greeks, for such views belong to the simplicity of nature, and have only been uprooted by our profligacy. If fewer deeds of violence are quoted in our days, it is not that men are more temperate, but because they are less credulous, and a complaint which would have been believed among a simple people would only excite laughter among ourselves. Therefore silence is the better course. There is a law in Deuteronomy, under which the outraged maiden was punished, along with her assailant, if the crime were committed in a town. But if in the country or in a lonely place, the latter alone was punished. For, says the law, the maiden cried for help, and there was none to hear. From this merciful interpretation of the law, girls learnt not to let themselves be surprised in lonely places. This change in public opinion has had a perceptible effect on our morals. It has produced our modern gallantry. Men have found that their pleasures depend, more than they expected, on the goodwill of the fair sex, and have secured this goodwill by attentions which have had their reward. See how we find ourselves led unconsciously from the physical to the moral constitution, how from the grosser union of the sexes spring the sweet laws of love. Woman reigns, not by the will of man, but by the decrees of nature herself. She had the power long before she showed it. That same Hercules who proposed to violate all the 50 daughters of Thespis was compelled to spin at the feet of Omphale, and Samson, the strong man, was less strong than Delilah. This power cannot be taken from woman, it is hers by right, she would have lost it long ago, were it possible. The consequences of sex are wholly unlike for man and woman. The male is only a male now and again, the female is always a female, or at least all her youth, everything reminds her of her sex, the performance of her functions requires a special constitution. She needs care during pregnancy and freedom from work when her child is born, she must have a quiet, easy life while she nurses her children, their education calls for patience and gentleness, for a zeal and love which nothing can dismay. She forms a bond between father and child, she alone can win the father's love for his children and convince him that they are indeed his own. What loving care is required to preserve a united family. And there should be no question of virtue in all this, it must be a labor of love, without which the human race would be doomed to extinction. The mutual duties of the two sexes are not, and cannot be, equally binding on both. Women do wrong to complain of the inequality of man-made laws, this inequality is not of man's making, or at any rate it is not the result of mere prejudice, but of reason. She to whom nature has entrusted the care of the children must hold herself responsible for them to their father. No doubt every breach of faith is wrong, and every faithless husband, who robs his wife of the sole reward of the stern duties of her sex, is cruel and unjust, but the faithless wife is worse, she destroys the family and breaks the bonds of nature. When she gives her husband children who are not his own, she is false both to him and them, her crime is not infidelity but treason. To my mind, it is the source of dissension and of crime of every kind. Can any position be more wretched than that of the unhappy father who, when he clasps his child to his breast, is haunted by the suspicion that this is the child of another, the badge of his own dishonor? A thief who is robbing his own children of their inheritance. Under such circumstances the family is little more than a group of secret enemies, armed against each other by a guilty woman, who compels them to pretend to love one another. Thus it is not enough that a wife should be faithful. Her husband, along with his friends and neighbors, must believe in her fidelity, she must be modest, devoted, retiring, she should have the witness not only of a good conscience, but of a good reputation. In a word, if a father must love his children, he must be able to respect their mother. For these reasons it is not enough that the woman should be chaste, she must preserve her reputation and her good name. From these principles there arises not only a moral difference between the sexes, but also a fresh motive for duty and propriety, which prescribes to women in particular the most scrupulous attention to their conduct, their manners, their behavior. Vague assertions as to the equality of the sexes and the similarity of their duties are only empty words, they are no answer to my argument. It is a poor sort of logic to quote isolated exceptions against laws so firmly established. Women, you say, are not always bearing children. Granted, yet that is their proper business. Because there are 100 or so of large towns in the world where women live licentiously and have few children, will you maintain that it is their business to have few children? And what would become of your towns if the remote country districts, with their simpler and purer women, did not make up for the barrenness of your fine ladies? There are plenty of country places where women with only 4 or 5 children are reckoned unfruitful. In conclusion, although here and there a woman may have few children, what difference does it make? 86. Is it any the less a woman's business to be a mother? And to not the general laws of nature and morality make provision for this state of things? Even if there were these long intervals, which you assume, between the periods of pregnancy, can a woman suddenly change her way of life without danger? Can she be a nursing mother today and a soldier tomorrow? Will she change her tastes and her feelings as a chameleon changes his color? Will she pass at once from the privacy of household duties and indoor occupations to the buffeting of the winds, the toils, the labors, the perils of war? Will she be now timid 87, now brave, now fragile, now robust? If the young men of Paris find a soldier's life too hard for them, how would a woman put up with it, a woman who has hardly ventured out of doors without a parasol and who has scarcely put a foot to the ground? Will she make a good soldier at an age when even men are retiring from this arduous business? There are countries, I grant you, where women bear and rear children with little or no difficulty, but in those lands the men go half-naked in all weathers, they strike down the wild beasts, they carry a canoe as easily as a knapsack. They pursue the chase for 700 or 800 leagues, they sleep in the open on the bare ground, they bear incredible fatigues and go many days without food. When women become strong, men become still stronger, when men become soft, women become softer, change both the terms and the ratio remains unaltered. I am quite aware that Plato, in the Republic, assigns the same gymnastics to women and men. Having got rid of the family, there is no place for women in his system of government, so he is forced to turn them into men. That great genius has worked out his plans in detail and has provided for every contingency. He has even provided against a difficulty which in all likelihood no one would ever have raised, but he has not succeeded in meeting the real difficulty. I am not speaking of the alleged community of wives which has often been laid to his charge. This assertion only shows that his detractors have never read his works. I refer to that political promiscuity under which the same occupations are assigned to both sexes alike, a scheme which could only lead to intolerable evils. I refer to that subversion of all the tenderest of our natural feelings, which he sacrificed to an artificial sentiment which can only exist by their aid. Will the bonds of convention hold firm without some foundation in nature? Can devotion to the state exist apart from the love of those near and dear to us? Can patriotism thrive except in the soil of that miniature fatherland, the home? Is it not the good son, the good husband, the good father, who makes the good citizen? When once it is proved that men and women are and ought to be unlike in constitution and in temperament, it follows that their education must be different. Nature teaches us that they should work together, but that each has its own share of the work. The end is the same, but the means are different, as are also the feelings which direct them. We have attempted to paint a natural man, let us try to paint a helpmeet for him. You must follow nature's guidance if you would walk aright. The native characters of sex should be respected as nature's handiwork. You are always saying, women have such and such faults, from which we are free. You are misled by your vanity, what would be faults in you are virtues in them, and things would go worse, if they were without these so-called faults. Take care that they do not degenerate into evil, but beware of destroying them. On the other hand, women are always exclaiming that we educate them for nothing but vanity and coquetry, that we keep them amused with trifles that we may be their masters. We are responsible, so they say, for the faults we attribute to them. How silly! What have men to do with the education of girls? What is there to hinder their mothers educating them as they please? There are no colleges for girls, so much the better for them. Would God there were none for the boys, their education would be more sensible and more wholesome. Who is it that compels a girl to waste her time on foolish trifles? Are they forced, against their will, to spend half their time over their toilet, following the example set them by you? Who prevents you teaching them, or having them taught, whatever seems good in your eyes? Is it our fault that we are charmed by their beauty and delighted by their airs and graces, if we are attracted and flattered by the arts they learn from you, if we love to see them prettily dressed? If we let them display at leisure the weapons by which we are subjugated? Well then, educate them like men. The more women are like men, the less influence they will have over men, and then men will be masters indeed. All the faculties common to both sexes are not equally shared between them, but taken as a whole they are fairly divided. Woman is worth more as a woman and less as a man. When she makes a good use of her own rights, she has the best of it. When she tries to usurp our rights, she is our inferior. It is impossible to controvert this, except by quoting exceptions after the usual fashion of the partisans of the fair sex. To cultivate the masculine virtues in women and to neglect their own is evidently to do them an injury. Women are too clear-sighted to be thus deceived. when they try to usurp our privileges they do not abandon their own. With this result, they are unable to make use of two incompatible things, so they fall below their own level as women, instead of rising to the level of men. If you are a sensible mother you will take my advice. Do not try to make your daughter a good man in defiance of nature. Make her a good woman, and be sure it will be better both for her and us. Does this mean that she must be brought up in ignorance and kept to housework only? Is she to be man's handmaid or his helpmeet? Will he dispense with her greatest charm, her companionship? To keep her a slave will he prevent her knowing and feeling? Will he make an automaton of her? No, indeed, that is not the teaching of nature, who has given women such a pleasant easy wit. On the contrary, nature means them to think, to will, to love, to cultivate their minds as well as their persons. She puts these weapons in their hands to make up for their lack of strength and to enable them to direct the strength of men. They should learn many things, but only such things as are suitable. When I consider the special purpose of woman, when I observe her inclinations or reckon up her duties, everything combines to indicate the mode of education she requires. Men and women are made for each other, but their mutual dependence differs in degree. Man is dependent on woman through his desires, woman is dependent on man through her desires and also through her needs. He could do without her better than she can do without him. She cannot fulfill her purpose in life without his aid, without his goodwill, without his respect. She is dependent on our feelings, on the price we put upon her virtue, and the opinion we have of her charms and her deserts. Nature herself has decreed that woman, both for herself and her children, should be at the mercy of man's judgment. Worth alone will not suffice, a woman must be thought worthy, nor beauty, she must be admired, nor virtue, she must be respected. A woman's honor does not depend on her conduct alone, but on her reputation, and no woman who permits herself to be considered vile is really virtuous. A man has no one but himself to consider, and so long as he does right he may defy public opinion, but when a woman does right her task is only half finished, and what people think of her matters as much as what she really is. Hence her education must, in this respect, be different from man's education. What will people think, is the grave of a man's virtue and the throne of a woman's. The children's health depends in the first place on the mother's, and the early education of man is also in a woman's hands. His morals, his passions, his tastes, his pleasures, his happiness itself, depend on her. A woman's education must therefore be planned in relation to man. To be pleasing in his sight, to win his respect and love, to train him in childhood, to tend him in manhood, to counsel and console, to make his life pleasant and happy, these are the duties of woman for all time. And this is what she should be taught while she is young. The further we depart from this principle, the further we shall be from our goal, and all our precepts will fail to secure her happiness or our own. Every woman desires to be pleasing in men's eyes, and this is right. But there is a great difference between wishing to please a man of worth, a really lovable man, and seeking to please those foppish mannikins who are a disgrace to their own sex and to the sex which they imitate. Neither nature nor reason can induce a woman to love an effeminate person, nor will she win love by imitating such a person. If a woman discards the quiet modest bearing of her sex, and adopts the airs of such foolish creatures, she is not following her vocation, she is forsaking it, she is robbing herself of the rights to which she lays claim. If we were different, she says, the men would not like us. She is mistaken. Only a fool likes folly, to wish to attract such men only shows her own foolishness. If there were no frivolous men, women would soon make them, and women are more responsible for men's follies than men are for theirs. The woman who loves true manhood and seeks to find favor in its sight will adopt means adapted to her ends. Woman is a coquette by profession, but her coquetry varies with her aims. Let these aims be in accordance with those of nature, and a woman will receive a fitting education. Even the tiniest little girls love finery. They are not content to be pretty, they must be admired. Their little airs and graces show that their heads are full of this idea, and as soon as they can understand they are controlled by, what will people think of you? If you are foolish enough to try this way with little boys, it will not have the same effect, give them their freedom and their sports, and they care very little what people think. It is a work of time to bring them under the control of this law. However acquired, this early education of little girls is an excellent thing in itself. As the birth of the body must precede the birth of the mind, so the training of the body must precede the cultivation of the mind. This is true of both sexes. But the aim of physical training for boys and girls is not the same. In the one case it is the development of strength, in the other of grace. Not that these qualities should be peculiar to either sex, but that their relative values should be different. Women should be strong enough to do anything gracefully, men should be skillful enough to do anything easily. The exaggeration of feminine delicacy leads to effeminacy in men. Women should not be strong like men but for them, so that their sons may be strong. Convents and boarding schools, with their plain food and ample opportunities for amusements, races, and games in the open air and in the garden, are better in this respect than the home, where the little girl is fed on delicacies. Continually encouraged or reproved, where she is kept sitting in a stuffy room, always under her mother's eye, afraid to stand or walk or speak or breathe, without a moment's freedom to play or jump or run or shout, or to be her natural, lively little self. There is either harmful indulgence or misguided severity, and no trace of reason. In this fashion heart and body are alike destroyed. In Sparta the girls used to take part in military sports just like the boys, not that they might go to war, but that they might bear sons who could endure hardship. That is not what I desire. To provide the state with soldiers it is not necessary that the mother should carry a musket and master the Prussian drill. Yet, on the whole, I think the Greeks were very wise in this matter of physical training. Young girls frequently appeared in public, not with the boys, but in groups apart. There was scarcely a festival, a sacrifice, or a procession without its bands of maidens, the daughters of the chief citizens. Crowned with flowers, chanting hymns, forming the chorus of the dance, bearing baskets, vases, offerings, they presented a charming spectacle to the depraved senses of the Greeks. A spectacle well fitted to efface the evil effects of their unseemly gymnastics. Whatever this custom may have done for the Greek men, it was well fitted to develop in the Greek women a sound constitution by means of pleasant, moderate, and healthy exercise. While the desire to please would develop a keen and cultivated taste without risk to character. When the Greek women married, they disappeared from public life. Within the four walls of their home they devoted themselves to the care of their household and family. This is the mode of life prescribed for women alike by nature and reason. These women gave birth to the healthiest, strongest, and best proportioned men who ever lived, and except in certain islands of ill repute, no women in the whole world, not even the Roman matrons, were ever at once so wise and so charming, so beautiful and so virtuous, as the women of ancient Greece. It is admitted that their flowing garments, which did not cramp the figure, preserved in men and women alike the fine proportions which are seen in their statues. These are still the models of art, although nature is so disfigured that they are no longer to be found among us. The Gothic trammels, the innumerable bands which confine our limbs as in a press, were quite unknown. The Greek women were wholly unacquainted with those frames of whalebone in which our women distort rather than display their figures. It seems to me that this abuse, which is carried to an incredible degree of folly in England, must sooner or later lead to the production of a degenerate race. Moreover, I maintain that the charm which these corsets are supposed to produce is in the worst possible taste. It is not a pleasant thing to see a woman cut in two like a wasp, it offends both the eye and the imagination. A slender waist has its limits, like everything else, in proportion and suitability, and beyond these limits it becomes a defect. This defect would be a glaring one in the nude, why should it be beautiful under the costume? I will not venture upon the reasons which induce women to encase themselves in these coats of mail. A clumsy figure, a large waist, are no doubt very ugly at 20, but at 30 they cease to offend the eye, and as we are bound to be what nature has made us at any given age, and as there is no deceiving the eye of man, such defects are less offensive at any age than the foolish affectations of a young thing of 40. Everything which cramps and confines nature is in bad taste, This is as true of the adornments of the person as of the ornaments of the mind. Life, health, common sense, and comfort must come first. There is no grace in discomfort, languor is not refinement, there is no charm in ill health, suffering may excite pity, but pleasure and delight demand the freshness of health. Boys and girls have many games in common, and this is as it should be. Do they not play together when they are grown up? They have also special tastes of their own. Boys want movement and noise, drums, tops, toy carts. Girls prefer things which appeal to the eye, and can be used for dressing up, mirrors, jewelry, finery, and specially dolls. The doll is the girl's special plaything, this shows her instinctive bent towards her life's work. The art of pleasing finds its physical basis in personal adornment, and this physical side of the art is the only one which the child can cultivate. Here is a little girl busy all day with her doll. She is always changing its clothes, dressing and undressing it, trying new combinations of trimmings well or ill-matched, her fingers are clumsy, her taste is crude, but there is no mistaking her bent. In this endless occupation time flies unheeded, the hours slip away unnoticed, even meals are forgotten. She is more eager for adornment than for food. But she is dressing her doll, not herself, you will say. Just so. She sees her doll, she cannot see herself, she cannot do anything for herself, she has neither the training, nor the talent, nor the strength, as yet she herself is nothing, she is engrossed in her doll and all her coquetry is devoted to it. This will not always be so, in due time she will be her own doll. We have here a very early and clearly marked bent, you have only to follow it and train it. What the little girl most clearly desires is to dress her doll, to make its bows, its tippets, its sashes, and its tuckers. She is dependent on other people's kindness in all this, and it would be much pleasanter to be able to do it herself. Here is a motive for her earliest lessons, they are not tasks prescribed, but favors bestowed. Little girls always dislike learning to read and write, but they are always ready to learn to sew. They think they are grown up, and in imagination they are using their knowledge for their own adornment. The way is open and it is easy to follow it, cutting out, embroidery, lace-making follow naturally. Tapestry is not popular. Furniture is too remote from the child's interests, it has nothing to do with the person, it depends on conventional tastes. Tapestry is a woman's amusement, young girls never care for it. This voluntary course is easily extended to include drawing, an art which is closely connected with taste in dress, but I would not have them taught landscape and still less figure painting. Leaves, fruit, flowers, draperies, anything that will make an elegant trimming for the accessories of the toilet, and enable the girl to design her own embroidery if she cannot find a pattern to her taste, that will be quite enough. Speaking generally, if it is desirable to restrict a man's studies to what is useful, this is even more necessary for women, whose life, though less laborious, should be even more industrious and more uniformly employed in a variety of duties. So that one talent should not be encouraged at the expense of others. Whatever may be said by the scornful, good sense belongs to both sexes alike. Girls are usually more docile than boys, and they should be subjected to more authority, as I shall show later on, but that is no reason why they should be required to do things in which they can see neither rhyme nor reason. The mother's art consists in showing the use of everything they are set to do, and this is all the easier as the girl's intelligence is more precocious than the boy's. This principle banishes, both for boys and girls, not only those pursuits which never lead to any appreciable results, not even increasing the charms of those who have pursued them, but also those studies whose utility is beyond the scholar's present age and can only be appreciated in later years. If I object to little boys being made to learn to read, still more do I object to it for little girls until they are able to see the use of reading. We generally think more of our own ideas than there's in our attempts to convince them of the utility of this art. After all, why should a little girl know how to read and write? Has she a house to manage? Most of them make a bad use of this fatal knowledge, and girls are so full of curiosity that few of them will fail to learn without compulsion. Possibly ciphering should come first. There is nothing so obviously useful, nothing which needs so much practice or gives so much opportunity for error as reckoning. If the little girl does not get the cherries for her lunch without an arithmetical exercise, she will soon learn to count. I once knew a little girl who learnt to write before she could read, and she began to write with her needle. To begin with, she would write nothing but O's. She was always making O's, large and small, of all kinds and one within another, but always drawn backwards. Unluckily one day she caught a glimpse of herself in the glass while she was at this useful work, and thinking that the cramped attitude was not pretty, like another Minerva she flung away her pen and declined to make any more O's. Her brother was no fonder of writing, but what he disliked was the constraint, not the look of the thing. She was induced to go on with her writing in this way. The child was fastidious and vain, she could not bear her sisters to wear her clothes. Her things had been marked, they declined to mark them any more, she must learn to mark them herself, there is no need to continue the story. Show the sense of the tasks you set your little girls, but keep them busy. Idleness and insubordination are two very dangerous faults, and very hard to cure when once established. Girls should be attentive and industrious, but this is not enough by itself, they should early be accustomed to restraint. This misfortune, if such it be, is inherent in their sex, and they will never escape from it, unless to endure more cruel sufferings. All their life long, they will have to submit to the strictest and most enduring restraints, those of propriety. They must be trained to bear the yoke from the first, so that they may not feel it, to master their own caprices and to submit themselves to the will of others. If they were always eager to be at work, they should sometimes be compelled to do nothing. Their childish faults, unchecked and unheeded, may easily lead to dissipation, frivolity, and inconstancy. To guard against this, teach them above all things self-control. Under our senseless conditions, the life of a good woman is a perpetual struggle against self, it is only fair that woman should bear her share of the ills she has brought upon man. Beware lest your girls become weary of their tasks and infatuated with their amusements. This often happens under our ordinary methods of education, where, as Fenelon says, all the tedium is on one side and all the pleasure on the other. If the rules already laid down are followed, the first of these dangers will be avoided, unless the child dislikes those about her. A little girl who is fond of her mother or her friend will work by her side all day without getting tired. The chatter alone will make up for any loss of liberty. But if her companion is distasteful to her, everything done under her direction will be distasteful too. Children who take no delight in their mother's company are not likely to turn out well. But to judge of their real feelings you must watch them and not trust to their words alone, for they are flatterers and deceitful and soon learn to conceal their thoughts. Neither should they be told that they ought to love their mother. Affection is not the result of duty, and in this respect constraint is out of place. Continual intercourse, constant care, habit itself, all these will lead a child to love her mother, if the mother does nothing to deserve the child's ill will. The very control she exercises over the child, if well directed, will increase rather than diminish the affection, for women being made for dependence, girls feel themselves made to obey. Just because they have, or ought to have, little freedom, they are apt to indulge themselves too fully with regard to such freedom as they have. They carry everything to extremes, and they devote themselves to their games with an enthusiasm even greater than that of boys. This is the second difficulty to which I referred. This enthusiasm must be kept in check, for it is the source of several vices commonly found among women, caprice, and that extravagant admiration which leads a woman to regard a thing with rapture today and to be quite indifferent to it tomorrow. This fickleness of taste is as dangerous as exaggeration, and both spring from the same cause. Do not deprive them of mirth, laughter, noise, and romping games, but do not let them tire of one game and go off to another. Do not leave them for a moment without restraint. Train them to break off their games and return to their other occupations without a murmur. Habit is all that is needed, as you have nature on your side. This habitual restraint produces a docility which woman requires all her life long, for she will always be in subjection to a man, or to man's judgment, and she will never be free to set her own opinion above his. What is most wanted in a woman is gentleness. Formed to obey a creature so imperfect as man, a creature often vicious and always faulty, she should early learn to submit to injustice and to suffer the wrongs inflicted on her by her husband without complaint. She must be gentle for her own sake, not his. Bitterness and obstinacy only multiply the sufferings of the wife and the misdeeds of the husband. The man feels that these are not the weapons to be used against him. Heaven did not make women attractive and persuasive that they might degenerate into bitterness, or meek that they should desire the mastery. Their soft voice was not meant for hard words, nor their delicate features for the frowns of anger. When they lose their temper they forget themselves, often enough they have just cause of complaint. But when they scold they always put themselves in the wrong. We should each adopt the tone which befits our sex. A soft-hearted husband may make an overbearing wife, but a man, unless he is a perfect monster, will sooner or later yield to his wife's gentleness, and the victory will be hers. Daughters must always be obedient, but mothers need not always be harsh. To make a girl docile you need not make her miserable, to make her modest you need not terrify her. On the contrary, I should not be sorry to see her allowed occasionally to exercise a little ingenuity, not to escape punishment for her disobedience, but to evade the necessity for obedience. Her dependence need not be made unpleasant, it is enough that she should realize that she is dependent. Cunning is a natural gift of woman, and so convinced am I that all our natural inclinations are right, that I would cultivate this among others, only guarding against its abuse. For the truth of this I appeal to every honest observer. I do not ask you to question women themselves, our cramping institutions may compel them to sharpen their wits, I would have you examine girls, little girls, newly born so to speak. Compare them with boys of the same age, and I am greatly mistaken if you do not find the little boys heavy, silly, and foolish, in comparison. Let me give one illustration in all its childish simplicity. Children are commonly forbidden to ask for anything at table, for people think they can do nothing better in the way of education than to burden them with useless precepts. As if a little bit of this or that were not readily given or refused without leaving a poor child dying of greediness intensified by hope. Every one knows how cunningly a little boy brought up in this way asked for salt when he had been overlooked at table. I do not suppose any one will blame him for asking directly for salt and indirectly for meat. The neglect was so cruel that I hardly think he would have been punished had he broken the rule and said plainly that he was hungry. But this is what I saw done by a little girl of 6. The circumstances were much more difficult, for not only was she strictly forbidden to ask for anything directly or indirectly, but disobedience would have been unpardonable, for she had eaten of every dish. One only had been overlooked, and on this she had set her heart. This is what she did to repair the omission without laying herself open to the charge of disobedience. She pointed to every dish in turn, saying, "I've had some of this. I've had some of this." However, she omitted the one dish so markedly that someone noticed it and said, "Have not you had some of this?" "Oh, no," replied the greedy little girl with soft voice and downcast eyes. These instances are typical of the cunning of the little boy and girl. What is good, and no general law can be bad. This special skill with which the female sex is endowed is a fair equivalent for its lack of strength. Without it woman would be man's slave, not his helpmeet. By her superiority in this respect she maintains her equality with man, and rules in obedience. She has everything against her, our faults and her own weakness and timidity. Her beauty and her wiles are all that she has. Should she not cultivate both? Yet beauty is not universal, it may be destroyed by all sorts of accidents, it will disappear with years, and habit will destroy its influence. A woman's real resource is her wit, not that foolish wit which is so greatly admired in society, a wit which does nothing to make life happier. But that wit which is adapted to her condition, the art of taking advantage of our position and controlling us through our own strength. Words cannot tell how beneficial this is to man, what a charm it gives to the society of men and women, how it checks the petulant child and restrains the brutal husband. Without it the home would be a scene of strife. With it, it is the abode of happiness. I know that this power is abused by the sly and the spiteful, but what is there that is not liable to abuse? Do not destroy the means of happiness because the wicked use them to our hurt. The toilet may attract notice, but it is the person that wins our hearts. Our finery is not us, its very artificiality often offends, and that which is least noticeable in itself often wins the most attention. The education of our girls is, in this respect, absolutely topsy-turvy. Ornaments are promised them as rewards, and they are taught to delight in elaborate finery. How lovely she is, people say when she is most dressed up. On the contrary, they should be taught that so much finery is only required to hide their defects, and that beauty's real triumph is to shine alone. The love of fashion is contrary to good taste, for faces do not change with the fashion, and while the person remains unchanged, what suits it at one time will suit it always. If I saw a young girl decked out like a little peacock, I should show myself anxious about her figure so disguised, and anxious what people would think of her. I should say, she is overdressed with all those ornaments, what a pity. Do you think she could do with something simpler? Is she pretty enough to do without this or that? Possibly she herself would be the first to ask that her finery might be taken off and that we should see how she looked without it. In that case her beauty should receive such praise as it deserves. I should never praise her unless simply dressed. If she only regards fine clothes as an aid to personal beauty, and as a tacit confession that she needs their aid, she will not be proud of her finery, she will be humbled by it. And if she hears someone say, how pretty she is, when she is smarter than usual, she will blush for shame. Moreover, though there are figures that require adornment, there are none that require expensive clothes. Extravagance in dress is the folly of the class rather than the individual, it is merely conventional. Genuine coquetry is sometimes carefully thought out, but never sumptuous, and Juno dressed herself more magnificently than Venus. As you cannot make her beautiful you are making her fine, said Apelles to an unskillful artist who was painting Helen loaded with jewelry. I have also noticed that the smartest clothes proclaim the plainest women. No folly could be more misguided. If a young girl has good taste and a contempt for fashion, give her a few yards of ribbon, muslin, and gauze, and a handful of flowers, without any diamonds, fringes, or lace. And she will make herself a dress 100-fold more becoming than all the smart clothes of La Duchapt. Good is always good, and as you should always look your best, the women who know what they are about select a good style and keep to it. And as they are not always changing their style, they think less about dress than those who can never settle to any one style. A genuine desire to dress becomingly does not require an elaborate toilet. Young girls rarely give much time to dress, needlework and lessons are the business of the day. Yet, except for the rouge, they are generally as carefully dressed as older women and often in better taste. Contrary to the usual opinion, the real cause of the abuse of the toilet is not vanity but lack of occupation. The woman who devotes 6 hours to her toilet is well aware that she is no better dressed than the woman who took half an hour. But she has got rid of so many of the tedious hours, and it is better to amuse oneself with one's clothes than to be sick of everything. Without the toilet, how would she spend the time between dinner and supper? With a crowd of women about her, she can at least cause them annoyance, which is amusement of a kind. Better still she avoids a tete-a-tete with the husband whom she never sees at any other time. Then there are the tradespeople, the dealers in bric-a-brac, the fine gentlemen, the minor poets with their songs, their verses, and their pamphlets. How could you get them together but for the toilet? Its only real advantage is the chance of a little more display than is permitted by full dress, and perhaps this is less than it seems and a woman gains less than she thinks. Do not be afraid to educate your women as women, teach them a woman's business, that they be modest, that they may know how to manage their house and look after their family. The grand toilet will soon disappear, and they will be more tastefully dressed. Growing girls perceive at once that all this outside adornment is not enough unless they have charms of their own. They cannot make themselves beautiful, they are too young for coquetry, but they are not too young to acquire graceful gestures, a pleasing voice, a self-possessed manner, a light step, a graceful bearing. To choose whatever advantages are within their reach. The voice extends its range, it grows stronger and more resonant, the arms become plumper, the bearing more assured, and they perceive that it is easy to attract attention however dressed. Needlework and industry suffice no longer, fresh gifts are developing and their usefulness is already recognized. I know that stern teachers would have us refuse to teach little girls to sing or dance, or to acquire any of the pleasing arts. This strikes me as absurd. Who should learn these arts, our boys? Are these to be the favorite accomplishments of men or women? Of neither, say they, profane songs are simply so many crimes, dancing is an invention of the evil one. Her tasks and her prayers we all the amusement a young girl should have. What strange amusements for a child of 10. I fear that these little saints who have been forced to spend their childhood in prayers to God will pass their youth in another fashion. When they are married they will try to make up for lost time. I think we must consider age as well as sex. A young girl should not live like her grandmother, she should be lively, merry, and eager, she should sing and dance to her heart's content, and enjoy all the innocent pleasures of youth. The time will come, all too soon, when she must settle down and adopt a more serious tone. But is this change in itself really necessary? Is it not merely another result of our own prejudices? By making good women the slaves of dismal duties, we have deprived marriage of its charm for men. Can we wonder that the gloomy silence they find at home drives them elsewhere, or inspires little desire to enter a state which offers so few attractions? Christianity, by exaggerating every duty, has made our duties impracticable and useless. By forbidding singing, dancing, and amusements of every kind, it renders women sulky, fault-finding, and intolerable at home. There is no religion which imposes such strict duties upon married life, and none in which such a sacred engagement is so often profaned. Such pains has been taken to prevent wives being amiable, that their husbands have become indifferent to them. This should not be, I grant you, but it will be, since husbands are but men. I would have an English maiden cultivate the talents which will delight her husband as zealously as the Circassian cultivates the accomplishments of an Eastern harem. Husbands, you say, care little for such accomplishments. So I should suppose, when they are employed, not for the husband, but to attract the young rakes who dishonor the home. But imagine a virtuous and charming wife, adorned with such accomplishments and devoting them to her husband's amusement, will she not add to his happiness? When he leaves his office worn out with the day's work, will she not prevent him seeking recreation elsewhere? Have we not all beheld happy families gathered together, each contributing to the general amusement? Are not the confidence and familiarity thus established, the innocence and the charm of the pleasures thus enjoyed, more than enough to make up for the more riotous pleasures of public entertainments? Pleasant accomplishments have been made too formal an affair of rules and precepts, so that young people find them very tedious instead of a mere amusement or a merry game as they ought to be. Nothing can be more absurd than an elderly singing or dancing master frowning upon young people, whose one desire is to laugh, and adopting a more pedantic and magisterial manner in teaching his frivolous art than if he were teaching the catechism. Take the case of singing. Does this art depend on reading music? Cannot the voice be made true and flexible? Can we not learn to sing with taste and even to play an accompaniment without knowing a note? Does the same kind of singing suit all voices alike? Is the same method adapted to every mind? You will never persuade me that the same attitudes, the same steps, the same movements, the same gestures, the same dances will suit a lively little brunette and a tall fair maiden with languishing eyes. So when I find a master giving the same lessons to all his pupils I say, he has his own routine, but he knows nothing of his art. Should young girls have masters or mistresses? I cannot say. I wish they could dispense with both. I wish they could learn of their own accord what they are already so willing to learn. I wish there were fewer of these dressed-up old ballet masters promenading our streets. I fear our young people will get more harm from intercourse with such people than profit from their instruction, and that their jargon, their tone, their airs and graces will instill a precocious taste for the frivolities which the teacher thinks so important, and to which the scholars are only too likely to devote themselves. Where pleasure is the only end in view, any one may serve as teacher, father, mother, brother, sister, friend, governess, the girl's mirror, and above all her own taste. Do not offer to teach, let her ask. Do not make a task of what should be a reward, and in these studies above all remember that the wish to succeed is the first step. If formal instruction is required, I leave it to you to choose between a master and a mistress. How can I tell whether a dancing master should take a young pupil by her soft white hand, make her lift her skirt and raise her eyes, open her arms and advance her throbbing bosom? But this I know, nothing on earth would induce me to be that master. Taste is formed partly by industry and partly by talent, and by its means the mind is unconsciously open to the idea of beauty of every kind, till at length it attains to those moral ideas which are so closely related to beauty. Perhaps this is one reason why ideas of propriety and modesty are acquired earlier by girls than by boys. For to suppose that this early feeling is due to the teaching of the governesses would show little knowledge of their style of teaching and of the natural development of the human mind. The art of speaking stands first among the pleasing arts, it alone can add fresh charms to those which have been blunted by habit. It is the mind which not only gives life to the body, but renews, so to speak, its youth. The flow of feelings and ideas give life and variety to the countenance, and the conversation to which it gives rise arouses and sustains attention, and fixes it continuously on one object. I suppose this is why little girls so soon learn to prattle prettily, and why men enjoy listening to them even before the child can understand them. They are watching for the first gleam of intelligence and sentiment. Women have ready tongues. They talk earlier, more easily, and more pleasantly than men. They are also said to talk more. This may be true, but I am prepared to reckon it to their credit. Eyes and mouth are equally busy and for the same cause. A man says what he knows, a woman says what will please, the one needs knowledge, the other taste, utility should be the man's object, the woman speaks to give pleasure. There should be nothing in common but truth. You should not check a girl's prattle like a boy's by the harsh question, what is the use of that, but by another question at least as difficult to answer, what effect will that have? At this early age when they know neither good nor evil, and are incapable of judging others, they should make this their rule and never say anything which is unpleasant to those about them. This rule is all the more difficult to apply because it must always be subordinated to our first rule, never tell a lie. I can see many other difficulties, but they belong to a later stage. For the present it is enough for your little girls to speak the truth without grossness, and as they are naturally averse to what is gross, education easily teaches them to avoid it. In social intercourse I observe that a man's politeness is usually more helpful and a woman's more caressing. This distinction is natural, not artificial. A man seeks to serve, a woman seeks to please. Hence a woman's politeness is less insincere than ours, whatever we may think of her character, for she is only acting upon a fundamental instinct. But when a man professes to put my interests before his own, I detect the falsehood, however disguised. Hence it is easy for women to be polite, and easy to teach little girls politeness. The first lessons come by nature. Art only supplements them and determines the conventional form which politeness shall take. The courtesy of woman to woman is another matter. Their manner is so constrained, their attention so chilly, they find each other so wearisome, that they take little pains to conceal the fact, and seem sincere even in their falsehood, since they take so little pains to conceal it. Still young girls do sometimes become sincerely attached to one another. At their age good spirits take the place of a good disposition, and they are so pleased with themselves that they are pleased with everyone else. Moreover, it is certain that they kiss each other more affectionately and caress each other more gracefully in the presence of men. For they are proud to be able to arouse their envy without danger to themselves by the sight of favors which they know will arouse that envy. If young boys must not be allowed to ask unsuitable questions, much more must they be forbidden to little girls. If their curiosity is satisfied or unskillfully evaded, it is a much more serious matter, for they are so keen to guess the mysteries concealed from them and so skillful to discover them. But while I would not permit them to ask questions, would have them question frequently, and pains should be taken to make them talk. Let them be teased to make them speak freely, to make them answer readily, to loosen mind and tongue while it can be done without danger. Such conversation always leading to merriment, yet skillfully controlled and directed, would form a delightful amusement at this age and might instill into these youthful hearts the first and perhaps the most helpful lessons in morals which they will ever receive. By teaching them in the guise of pleasure and fun what qualities are esteemed by men and what is the true glory and happiness of a good woman. If boys are incapable of forming any true idea of religion, much more is it beyond the grasp of girls. And for this reason I would speak of it all the sooner to little girls, for if we wait till they are ready for a serious discussion of these deep subjects we should be in danger of never speaking of religion at all. A woman's reason is practical, and therefore she soon arrives at a given conclusion, but she fails to discover it for herself. The social relation of the sexes is a wonderful thing. This relation produces a moral person of which woman is the eye and man the hand, but the two are so dependent on one another that the man teaches the woman what to see, while she teaches him what to do. If women could discover principles and if men had as good heads for detail, they would be mutually independent, they would live in perpetual strife, and there would be an end to all society. But in their mutual harmony each contributes to a common purpose, each follows the other's lead, each commands and each obeys. As a woman's conduct is controlled by public opinion, so is her religion ruled by authority. The daughter should follow her mother's religion, the wife her husband's. Were that religion false, the docility which leads mother and daughter to submit to nature's laws would blot out the sin of error in the sight of God. Unable to judge for themselves they should accept the judgment of father and husband as that of the Church. While women unaided cannot deduce the rules of their faith, neither can they assign limits to that faith by the evidence of reason. They allow themselves to be driven hither and thither by all sorts of external influences, they are ever above or below the truth. Extreme in everything, they are either altogether reckless or altogether pious. You never find them able to combine virtue and piety. Their natural exaggeration is not wholly to blame, the ill-regulated control exercised over them by men is partly responsible. Loose morals bring religion into contempt. The terrors of remorse make it a tyrant, this is why women have always too much or too little religion. As a woman's religion is controlled by authority it is more important to show her plainly what to believe than to explain the reasons for belief. For faith attached to ideas half understood is the main source of fanaticism, and faith demanded on behalf of what is absurd leads to madness or unbelief. Whether our catechisms tend to produce impiety rather than fanaticism I cannot say, but I do know that they lead to one or other. In the first place, when you teach religion to little girls never make it gloomy or tiresome, never make it a task or a duty, and therefore never give them anything to learn by heart, not even their prayers. Be content to say your own prayers regularly in their presence, but do not compel them to join you. Let their prayers be short, as Christ himself has taught us. Let them always be said with becoming reverence and respect. Remember that if we ask the Almighty to give heed to our words, we should at least give heed to what we mean to say. It does not much matter that a girl should learn her religion young, but it does matter that she should learn it thoroughly, and still more that she should learn to love it. If you make religion a burden to her, if you always speak of God's anger, if in the name of religion you impose all sorts of disagreeable duties, duties which she never sees you perform, what can she suppose but that to learn one's catechism and to say one's prayers is only the duty of a little girl, and she will long to be grown up to escape, like you, from these duties? Example. Without it you will never succeed in teaching children anything. When you explain the articles of faith let it be by direct teaching, not by question and answer. Children should only answer what they think, not what has been drilled into them. All the answers in the catechism are the wrong way about, it is the scholar who instructs the teacher. In the child's mouth they are a downright lie, since they explain what he does not understand, and affirm what he cannot believe. Find me, if you can, an intelligent man who could honestly say his catechism. The first question I find in our catechism is as follows: Who created you and brought you into the world? To which the girl, who thinks it was her mother, replies without hesitation, "It was God." All she knows is that she is asked a question which she only half understands, and she gives an answer she does not understand at all. I wish someone who really understands the development of children's minds would write a catechism for them. It might be the most useful book ever written, and, in my opinion, it would do its author no little honor. This at least is certain: if it were a good book it would be very unlike our catechisms. Such a catechism will not be satisfactory unless the child can answer the questions of its own accord without having to learn the answers. Indeed, the child will often ask the questions itself. An example is required to make my meaning plain, and I feel how ill-equipped I am to furnish such an example. I will try to give some sort of outline of my meaning. To get to the first question in our catechism, I suppose we must begin somewhat after the following fashion. Nurse: do you remember when your mother was a little girl? Child: no, nurse. Nurse: why not, when you have such a good memory? Child: I was not alive. Nurse: then you were not always alive. Child: no. Nurse: will you live forever? Child: yes. Nurse: are you young or old? Child: I am young. Nurse: is your grandmama old or young? Child: she is old. Nurse: was she ever young? Child: yes. Nurse: why is she not young now? Child: she has grown old. Nurse: will you grow old too? Child: I don't know. Nurse: where are your last year's frocks? Child: they have been unpicked. Nurse: why? Child: because they were too small for me. Nurse: why were they too small? Child: I have grown bigger. Nurse: will you grow any more? Child: oh, yes. Nurse: and what becomes of big girls? Child: they grow into women. Nurse: and what becomes of women? Child: they are mothers. Nurse: and what becomes of mothers? Child: they grow old. Nurse: will you grow old? Child: when I am a mother. Nurse: and what becomes of old people? Child: I don't know. Nurse: what became of your grandfather? Child: he died. 88. Nurse: why did he die? Child: because he was so old. Nurse: what becomes of old people? Child: they die. Nurse: and when you are old? Child: oh, nurse, I don't want to die. Nurse: my dear, no one wants to die, and everybody dies. Child: why, will mama die too? Nurse: yes, like everybody else. Women grow old as well as men, and old age ends in death. Child: what must I do to grow old? Very, very slowly. Nurse: be good while you are little. Child: I will always be good, nurse. Nurse: so much the better. But do you suppose you will live forever? Child: when I am very, very old. Nurse: well. Child: when we are so very old you say we must die. Nurse: you must die some day. Child: oh dear. I suppose I must. Nurse: who lived before you? Child: my father and mother. Nurse: and before them? Child: their father and mother. Nurse: who will live after you? Child: my children. Nurse: who will live after them? Child: their children. In this way, by concrete examples, you will find a beginning and end for the human race like everything else, that is to say, a father and mother who never had a father and mother, and children who will never have children of their own. It is only after a long course of similar questions that we are ready for the first question in the catechism, then alone can we put the question and the child may be able to understand it. But what a gap there is between the first and the second question, which is concerned with the definitions of the divine nature. When will this chasm be bridged? God is a spirit. And what is a spirit? Shall I start the child upon this difficult question of metaphysics which grown men find so hard to understand? These are no questions for a little girl to answer. If she asks them, it is as much or more than we can expect. In that case I should tell her quite simply, you ask me what God is. It is not easy to say, we can neither hear nor see nor handle God, we can only know him by his works. To learn what he is, you must wait till you know what he has done. If our dogmas are all equally true, they are not equally important. It makes little difference to the glory of God that we should perceive it everywhere, but it does make a difference to human society, and to every member of that society. That a man should know and do the duties which are laid upon him by the law of God, his duty to his neighbor and to himself. This is what we should always be teaching one another, and it is this which fathers and mothers are specially bound to teach their little ones. Whether a virgin became the mother of her Creator, whether she gave birth to God, or merely to a man into whom God has entered, whether the Father and the Son are of the same substance or of like substance only. Whether the Spirit proceeded from one or both of these who are but one, or from both together, however important these questions may seem. I cannot see that it is any more necessary for the human race to come to a decision with regard to them than to know what day to keep Easter, or whether we should tell our beads, fast and refuse to eat meat, speak Latin or French in church, adorn the walls with statues, hear or say Mass, and have no wife of our own. Let each think as he pleases. I cannot see that it matters to any one but himself. For my own part it is no concern of mine. But what does concern my fellow creatures and myself alike is to know that there is indeed a judge of human fate, that we are all his children, that he bids us all be just, he bids us love one another, he bids us be kindly and merciful. He bids us keep our word with all men, even with our own enemies and his. We must know that the apparent happiness of this world is not, that there is another life to come, in which this Supreme Being will be the rewarder of the just and the judge of the unjust. Children need to be taught these doctrines, and others like them and all citizens require to be persuaded of their truth. Whoever sets his face against these doctrines is indeed guilty, he is the disturber of the peace, the enemy of society. Whoever goes beyond these doctrines and seeks to make us the slaves of his private opinions, reaches the same goal by another way. To establish his own kind of order he disturbs the peace. In his rash pride he makes himself the interpreter of the divine, and in his name demands the homage and the reverence of mankind. So far as may be, he sets himself in God's place. He should receive the punishment of sacrilege if he is not punished for his intolerance. Give no heed, therefore, to all those mysterious doctrines which are words without ideas for us, all those strange teachings, the study of which is too often offered as a substitute for virtue. A study which more often makes men mad rather than good. Keep your children ever within the little circle of dogmas which are related to morality. Convince them that the only useful learning is that which teaches us to act rightly. Do not make your daughters theologians and casuists. Only teach them such things of heaven as conduce to human goodness, train them to feel that they are always in the presence of God, who sees their thoughts and deeds, their virtue and their pleasures. Teach them to do good without ostentation and because they love it, to suffer evil without a murmur, because God will reward them, in a word to be all their life long what they will be glad to have been when they appear in his presence. This is true religion, this alone is incapable of abuse, impiety, or fanaticism. Let those who will, teach a religion more sublime, but this is the only religion I know. Moreover, it is as well to observe that, until the age when the reason becomes enlightened, when growing emotion gives a voice to conscience, what is wrong for young people is what those about have decided to be wrong. What they are told to do is good, what they are forbidden to do is bad. That is all they ought to know. This shows how important it is for girls, even more than for boys, that the right people should be chosen to be with them and to have authority over them. At last there comes a time when they begin to judge things for themselves, and that is the time to change your method of education. Perhaps I have said too much already. To what shall we reduce the education of our women if we give them no law but that of conventional prejudice? Let us not degrade so far the set which rules over us, and which does us honor when we have not made it vile. For all mankind there is a law anterior to that of public opinion. All other laws should bend before the inflexible control of this law. It is the judge of public opinion, and only in so far as the esteem of men is in accordance with this law has it any claim on our obedience. This law is our individual conscience. I will not repeat what has been said already. It is enough to point out that if these two laws clash, the education of women will always be imperfect. Right feeling without respect for public opinion will not give them that delicacy of soul which lends to right conduct the charm of social approval. While respect for public opinion without right feeling will only make false and wicked women who put appearances in the place of virtue. It is, therefore, important to cultivate a faculty which serves as judge between the two guides, which does not permit conscience to go astray and corrects the errors of prejudice. That faculty is reason. But what a crowd of questions arise at this word. Are women capable of solid reason? Should they cultivate it? Can they cultivate it successfully? Is this culture useful in relation to the functions laid upon them? Is it compatible with becoming simplicity? The different ways of envisaging and answering these questions lead to two extremes. Some would have us keep women indoors sewing and spinning with their maids. Thus they make them nothing more than the chief servant of their master. Others, not content to secure their rights, lead them to usurp ours. For to make woman our superior in all the qualities proper to her sex, and to make her our equal in all the rest, what is this but to transfer to the woman the superiority which nature has given to her husband? The reason which teaches a man his duties is not very complex, the reason which teaches a woman hers is even simpler. The obedience and fidelity which she owes to her husband, the tenderness and care due to her children, are such natural and self-evident consequences of her position that she cannot honestly refuse her consent to the inner voice which is her guide, nor fail to discern her duty in her natural inclination. I would not altogether blame those who would restrict a woman to the labors of her sex and would leave her in profound ignorance of everything else. But that would require a standard of morality at once very simple and very healthy, or a life withdrawn from the world. In great towns, among immoral men, such a woman would be too easily led astray. Her virtue would too often be at the mercy of circumstances. In this age of philosophy, virtue must be able to resist temptation, she must know beforehand what she may hear and what she should think of it. Moreover, in submission to man's judgment she should deserve his esteem, above all she should obtain the esteem of her husband, she should not only make him love her person, she should make him approve her conduct. She should justify his choice before the world, and do honor to her husband through the honor given to the wife. But how can she set about this task if she is ignorant of our institutions, our customs, our notions of propriety, if she knows nothing of the source of man's judgment, nor the passions by which it is swayed? Since she depends both on her own conscience and on public opinion, she must learn to know and reconcile these two laws, and to put her own conscience first only when the two are opposed to each other. She becomes the judge of her own judges, she decides when she should obey and when she should refuse her obedience. She weighs their prejudices before she accepts or rejects them. She learns to trace them to their source, to foresee what they will be, and to turn them in her own favor. She is careful never to give cause for blame if duty allows her to avoid it. This cannot be properly done without cultivating her mind and reason. I always come back to my first principle and it supplies the solution of all my difficulties. I study what is, I seek its cause, and I discover in the end that what is good. I go to houses where the master and mistress do the honors together. They are equally well educated, equally polite, equally well equipped with wit and good taste, both of them are inspired with the same desire to give their guests a good reception and to send everyone away satisfied. The husband omits no pains to be attentive to every one, he comes and goes and sees to every one and takes all sorts of trouble, he is attention itself. The wife remains in her place. A little circle gathers round her and apparently conceals the rest of the company from her, yet she sees everything that goes on, no one goes without a word with her. She has omitted nothing which might interest anybody, she has said nothing unpleasant to any one, and without any fuss the least is no more overlooked than the greatest. Dinner is announced, they take their places. The man knowing the assembled guests will place them according to his knowledge, the wife, without previous acquaintance, never makes a mistake. Their looks and bearing have already shown her what is wanted, and every one will find himself where he wishes to be. I do not assert that the servants forget no one. The master of the house may have omitted no one, but the mistress perceives what you like and sees that you get it. While she is talking to her neighbor she has one eye on the other end of the table. She sees who is not eating because he is not hungry and who is afraid to help himself because he is clumsy and timid. When the guests leave the table every one thinks she has had no thought but for him, everybody thinks she has had no time to eat anything, but she has really eaten more than anybody. When the guests are gone, husband and wife tales over the events of the evening. He relates what was said to him, what was said and done by those with whom he conversed. If the lady is not always quite exact in this respect, yet on the other hand she perceived what was whispered at the other end of the room, she knows what so-and-so thought, and what was the meaning of this speech or that gesture. There is scarcely a change of expression for which she has not an explanation in readiness, and she is almost always right. The same turn of mind which makes a woman of the world such an excellent hostess, enables a flirt to excel in the art of amusing a number of suitors. Coquetry, cleverly carried out, demands an even finer discernment than courtesy. Provided a polite lady is civil to everybody, she has done fairly well in any case, but the flirt would soon lose her hold by such clumsy uniformity. If she tries to be pleasant to all her lovers alike, she will disgust them all. In ordinary social intercourse the manners adopted towards everybody are good enough for all. No question is asked as to private likes or dislikes provided all are alike well received. But in love, a favor shared with others is an insult. A man of feeling would rather be singled out for ill treatment than be caressed with the crowd, and the worst that can befall him is to be treated like everyone else. So a woman who wants to keep several lovers at her feet must persuade every one of them that she prefers him, and she must contrive to do this in the sight of all the rest, each of whom is equally convinced that he is her favorite. If you want to see a man in a quandary, place him between two women with each of whom he has a secret understanding, and see what a fool he looks. But put a woman in similar circumstances between two men, and the results will be even more remarkable. You will be astonished at the skill with which she cheats them both, and makes them laugh at each other. Now if that woman were to show the same confidence in both, if she were to be equally familiar with both, how could they be deceived for a moment? If she treated them alike, would she not show that they both had the same claims upon her? Oh, she is far too clever for that. So far from treating them just alike, she makes a marked difference between them, and she does it so skillfully that the man she flatters thinks it is affection, and the man she ill-uses think it is spite. So that each of them believes she is thinking of him, when she is thinking of no one but herself. A general desire to please suggests similar measures. People would be disgusted with a woman's whims if they were not skillfully managed, and when they are artistically distributed her servants are more than ever enslaved. Usa ogianarte la donna, onde sia colto. Nella sua ridi alcun novello amante. Nicon tutti, eni semper un stesso volto. Serba, ma cangia a tempo atto e sembient. Tasso, Jerus. Delaware, c. 4, v. 87. What is the secret of this art? Is it not the result of a delicate and continuous observation which shows her what is taking place in a man's heart, so that she is able to encourage or to check every hidden impulse? Can this art be acquired? No. It is born with women, it is common to them all, and men never show it to the same degree. It is one of the distinctive characters of the sex. Self-possession, penetration, delicate observation, this is a woman's science. The skill to make use of it is her chief accomplishment. This is what is, and we have seen why it is so. It is said that women are false. They become false. They are really endowed with skill, not duplicity. In the genuine inclinations of their sex they are not false even when they tell a lie. Why do you consult their words when it is not their mouths that speak? Consult their eyes, their color, their breathing, their timid manner, their slight resistance, that is the language nature gave them for your answer. The lips always say, no, and rightly so. But the tone is not always the same, and that cannot lie. Has not a woman the same needs as a man, but without the same right to make them known? Her fate would be too cruel if she had no language in which to express her legitimate desires except the words which she dare not utter. Must her modesty condemn her to misery? Does she not require a means of indicating her inclinations without open expression? What skill is needed to hide from her lover what she would fain reveal? Is it not of vital importance that she should learn to touch his heart without showing that she cares for him? It is a pretty story, that tale of Galatea with her apple and her clumsy flight. What more is needed? Will she tell the shepherd who pursues her among the willows that she only flees that he may follow? If she did, it would be a lie, for she would no longer attract him. The more modest a woman is, the more art she needs, even with her husband. Yes, I maintain that coquetry, kept within bounds, becomes modest and true, and out of it springs a law of right conduct. One of my opponents has very truly asserted that virtue is one. You cannot disintegrate it and choose this and reject the other. If you love virtue, you love it in its entirety, and you close your heart when you can, and you always close your lips to the feelings which you ought not to allow. Moral truth is not only what is, but what is good. What is bad ought not to be, and ought not to be confessed, especially when that confession produces results which might have been avoided. If I were tempted to steal, and in confessing it I tempted another to become my accomplice, the very confession of my temptation would amount to a yielding to that temptation. Why do you say that modesty makes women false? Are those who lose their modesty more sincere than the rest? Not so, they are 1,000-fold more deceitful. This degree of depravity is due to many vices, none of which is rejected, vices which owe their power to intrigue and falsehood. 89. On the other hand, those who are not utterly shameless, who take no pride in their faults, who are able to conceal their desires even from those who inspire them, those who confess their passion most reluctantly. These are the truest and most sincere, these are they on whose fidelity you may generally rely. The only example I know which might be quoted as a recognized exception to these remarks is Emile de L'Enclos, and she was considered a prodigy. In her scorn for the virtues of women, she practiced, so they say, the virtues of a man. She is praised for her frankness and uprightness, she was a trustworthy acquaintance and a faithful friend. To complete the picture of her glory it is said that she became a man. That may be, but in spite of her high reputation I should no more desire that man as my friend than as my mistress. This is not so irrelevant as it seems. I am aware of the tendencies of our modern philosophy which make a jest of female modesty and its so-called insincerity. I also perceive that the most certain result of this philosophy will be to deprive the women of this century of such shreds of honor as they still possess. On these grounds I think we may decide in general terms what sort of education is suited to the female mind, and the objects to which we should turn its attention in early youth. As I have already said, the duties of their sex are more easily recognized than performed. They must learn in the first place to love those duties by considering the advantages to be derived from them, that is the only way to make duty easy. Every age and condition has its own duties. We are quick to see our duty if we love it. Honor your position as a woman, and in whatever station of life to which it shall please heaven to call you, you will be well off. The essential thing is to be what nature has made you, women are only too ready to be what men would have them. The search for abstract and speculative truths, for principles and axioms in science, for all that tends to wide generalization, is beyond a woman's grasp, their studies should be thoroughly practical. It is their business to apply the principles discovered by men, it is their place to make the observations which lead men to discover those principles. A woman's thoughts, beyond the range of her immediate duties, should be directed to the study of men, or the acquirement of that agreeable learning whose sole end is the formation of taste. For the works of genius are beyond her reach, and she has neither the accuracy nor the attention for success in the exact sciences. As for the physical sciences, to decide the relations between living creatures and the laws of nature is the task of that sex which is more active and enterprising, which sees more things. That sex which is possessed of greater strength and is more accustomed to the exercise of that strength. Woman, Weak as she is and limited in her range of observation, perceives and judges the forces at her disposal to supplement her weakness, and those forces are the passions of man. Her own mechanism is more powerful than ours. She has many levers which may set the human heart in motion. She must find a way to make us desire what she cannot achieve unaided and what she considers necessary or pleasing, therefore she must have a thorough knowledge of man's mind. Not an abstract knowledge of the mind of man in general, but the mind of those men who are about her, the mind of those men who have authority over her, either by law or custom. She must learn to divine their feelings from speech and action, look and gesture. By her own speech and action, look and gesture, she must be able to inspire them with the feelings she desires, without seeming to have any such purpose. The men will have a better philosophy of the human heart, but she will read more accurately in the heart of men. Woman should discover, so to speak, an experimental morality, man should reduce it to a system. Woman has more wit, man more genius. Woman observes, man reasons, together they provide the clearest light and the profoundest knowledge which is possible to the unaided human mind, in a word, the surest knowledge of self and of others of which the human race is capable. In this way art may constantly tend to the perfection of the instrument which nature has given us. The world is woman's book, if she reads it ill, it is either her own fault or she is blinded by passion. Yet the genuine mother of a family is no woman of the world, she is almost as much of a recluse as the nun in her convent. Those who have marriageable daughters should do what is or ought to be done for those who are entering the cloisters, they should show them the pleasures they forsake before they are allowed to renounce them. Lest the deceitful picture of unknown pleasures should creep in to disturb the happiness of their retreat. In France it is the girls who live in convents and the wives who flaunt in society. Among the ancients it was quite otherwise, girls enjoyed, as I have said already, many games and public festivals, the married women lived in retirement. This was a more reasonable custom and more conducive to morality. A girl may be allowed a certain amount of coquetry, and she may be mainly occupied at amusement. A wife has other responsibilities at home, and she is no longer on the lookout for a husband, but women would not appreciate the change, and unluckily it is they who set the fashion. Mothers, let your daughters be your companions. Give them good sense and an honest heart, and then conceal from them nothing that a pure eye may behold. Balls, assemblies, sports, the theatre itself, everything which viewed amiss delights imprudent youth may be safely displayed to a healthy mind. The more they know of these noisy pleasures, the sooner they will cease to desire them. I can fancy the outcry with which this will be received. What girl will resist such an example? Their heads are turned by the first glimpse of the world. Not one of them is ready to give it up. That may be, but before you showed them this deceitful prospect, did you prepare them to behold it without emotion? Did you tell them plainly what it was they would see? Did you show it in its true light? Did you arm them against the illusions of vanity? Did you inspire their young hearts with a taste for the true pleasures which are not to be met with in this tumult? What precautions, what steps, did you take to preserve them from the false taste which leads them astray? Not only have you done nothing to preserve their minds from the tyranny of prejudice, you have fostered that prejudice. You have taught them to desire every foolish amusement they can get. Your own example is their teacher. Young people on their entrance into society have no guide but their mother, who is often just as silly as they are themselves, and quite unable to show them things except as she sees them herself. Her example is stronger than reason. It justifies them in their own eyes, and the mother's authority is an unanswerable excuse for the daughter. If I ask a mother to bring her daughter into society, I assume that she will show it in its true light. The evil begins still earlier. The convents are regular schools of coquetry, not that honest coquetry which I have described, but a coquetry the source of every kind of misconduct, a coquetry which turns out girls who are the most ridiculous little madams. When they leave the convent to take their place in smart society, young women find themselves quite at home. They have been educated for such a life, is it strange that they like it? I am afraid what I am going to say may be based on prejudice rather than observation, but so far as I can see, one finds more family affection, more good wives and loving mothers in Protestant than in Catholic countries. If that is so, we cannot fail to suspect that the difference is partly due to the convent schools. The charms of a peaceful family life must be known to be enjoyed, their delights should be tasted in childhood. It is only in our Father's home that we learn to love our own, and a woman whose mother did not educate her herself will not be willing to educate her own children. Unfortunately, there is no such thing as home education in our large towns. Society is so general and so mixed there is no place left for retirement, and even in the home we live in public. We live in company till we have no family, and we scarcely know our own relations, we see them as strangers. And the simplicity of home life disappears together with the sweet familiarity which was its charm. In this wise do we draw with our mother's milk a taste for the pleasures of the age and the maxims by which it is controlled. Girls are compelled to assume an air of propriety so that men may be deceived into marrying them by their appearance. But watch these young people for a moment. Under a pretense of coyness they barely conceal the passion which devours them, and already you may read in their eager eyes their desire to imitate their mothers. It is not a husband they want, but the license of a married woman. What need of a husband when there are so many other resources, but a husband there must be to act as a screen. 90 There is modesty on the brow, but vice in the heart, this sham modesty is one of its outward signs. They affect it that they may be rid of it once for all. Women of Paris and London, forgive me. There may be miracles everywhere, but I am not aware of them. And if there is even one among you who is really pure in heart, I know nothing of our institutions. All these different methods of education lead alike to a taste for the pleasures of the great world, and to the passions which this taste so soon kindles. In our great towns depravity begins at birth, in the smaller towns it begins with reason. Young women brought up in the country are soon taught to despise the happy simplicity of their lives, and hasten to Paris to share the corruption of ours. Vices, cloaked under the fair name of accomplishments, are the sole object of their journey. Ashamed to find themselves so much behind the noble license of the Parisian ladies, they hasten to become worthy of the name of Parisian. Which is responsible for the evil, the place where it begins, or the place where it is accomplished? I would not have a sensible mother bring her girl to Paris to show her these sights so harmful to others, but I assert that if she did so, either the girl has been badly brought up, or such sights have little danger for her. With good taste, good sense, and a love of what is right, these things are less attractive than to those who abandon themselves to their charm. In Paris you may see giddy young things hastening to adopt the tone and fashions of the town for some 6 months, so that they may spend the rest of their life in disgrace. But who gives any heed to those who, disgusted with the rout, return to their distant home and are contented with their lot when they have compared it with that which others desire? How many young wives have I seen whose good-natured husbands have taken them to Paris where they might live if they pleased? But they have shrunk from it and returned home more willingly than they went, saying tenderly, "Ah, let us go back to our cottage, life is happier there than in these palaces." We do not know how many there are who have not bowed the knee to Baal, who scorn his senseless worship. Fools make a stir, good women pass unnoticed. If so many women preserve a judgment which is proof against temptation, in spite of universal prejudice, in spite of the bad education of girls, what would their judgment have been, had it been strengthened by suitable instruction? Or rather left unaffected by evil teaching, for to preserve or restore the natural feelings is our main business. You can do this without preaching endless sermons to your daughters, without crediting them with your harsh morality. The only effect of such teaching is to inspire a dislike for the teacher and the lessons. In talking to a young girl you need not make her afraid of her duties, nor need you increase the burden laid upon her by nature. When you explain her duties speak plainly and pleasantly. Do not let her suppose that the performance of these duties is a dismal thing, away with every affectation of disgust or pride. Every thought which we desire to arouse should find its expression in our pupils, their catechism of conduct should be as brief and plain as their catechism of religion, but it need not be so serious. Show them that these same duties are the source of their pleasures and the basis of their rights. Is it so hard to win love by love, happiness by an amiable disposition, obedience by worth, and honor by self-respect? How fair are these woman's rights, how worthy of reverence, how dear to the heart of man when a woman is able to show their worth. These rights are no privilege of years, a woman's empire begins with her virtues. Her charms are only in the bud, yet she reigns already by the gentleness of her character and the dignity of her modesty. Is there any man so hard-hearted and uncivilized that he does not abate his pride and take heed to his manners with a sweet and virtuous girl of 16, who listens but says little? Her bearing is modest, her conversation honest, her beauty does not lead her to forget her sex and her youth, her very timidity arouses interest, while she wins for herself the respect which she shows to others. These external signs are not devoid of meaning, they do not rest entirely upon the charms of sense, they arise from that conviction that we all feel that women are the natural judges of a man's worth. Who would be scorned by women? Not even he who has ceased to desire their love. And do you suppose that I, who tell them such harsh truths, am indifferent to their verdict? Reader, I care more for their approval than for yours, you are often more effeminate than they. While I scorn their morals, I will revere their justice, I care not though they hate me, if I can compel their esteem. What great things might be accomplished by their influence if only we could bring it to bear. Alas for the age whose women lose their ascendancy, and fail to make men respect their judgment. This is the last stage of degradation. Every virtuous nation has shown respect to women. Consider Sparta, Germany, and Rome. Rome the throne of glory and virtue, if ever they were enthroned on earth. The Roman women awarded honor to the deeds of great generals, they mourned in public for the fathers of the country, their awards and their tears were alike held sacred as the most solemn utterance of the Republic. Every great revolution began with the women. Through a woman Rome gained her liberty, through a woman the plebeians won the consulate, through a woman the tyranny of the Decemvirs was overthrown. It was the women who saved Rome when besieged by Coriolanus. What would you have said at the sight of this procession, you Frenchmen who pride yourselves on your gallantry, would you not have followed it with shouts of laughter? You and I see things with such different eyes, and perhaps we are both right. Such a procession formed of the fairest beauties of France would be an indecent spectacle. But let it consist of Roman ladies, you will all gaze with the eyes of the Volscians and feel with the heart of Coriolanus. I will go further and maintain that virtue is no less favorable to love than to other rights of nature, and that it adds as much to the power of the beloved as to that of the wife or mother. There is no real love without enthusiasm, and no enthusiasm without an object of perfection real or supposed, but always present in the imagination. What is there to kindle the hearts of lovers for whom this perfection is nothing, for whom the loved one is merely the means to sensual pleasure? Nay, not thus is the heart kindled, not thus does it abandon itself to those sublime transports which form the rapture of lovers and the charm of love. Love is an illusion, I grant you, but its reality consists in the feelings it awakes, in the love of true beauty which it inspires. That beauty is not to be found in the object of our affections, it is the creation of our illusions. What matter? Do we not still sacrifice all those baser feelings to the imaginary model? And we still feed our hearts on the virtues we attribute to the beloved, we still withdraw ourselves from the baseness of human nature. What lover is there who would not give his life for his mistress? What gross and sensual passion is there in a man who is willing to die? We scoff at the knights of old, they knew the meaning of love, we know nothing but debauchery. When the teachings of romance began to seem ridiculous, it was not so much the work of reason as of immorality. Natural relations remain the same throughout the centuries, their good or evil effects are unchanged. Prejudices, masquerading as reason, can but change their outward seeming, self-mastery, even at the behest of fantastic opinions, will not cease to be great and good. And the true motives of honor will not fail to appeal to the heart of every woman who is able to seek happiness in life in her woman's duties. To a household woman chastity above all must be a delightful virtue. She sees all the kingdoms of the world before her and she triumphs over herself and them, she sits enthroned in her own soul and all men do her homage, a few passing struggles are crowned with perpetual glory. She secures the affection, or it may be the envy, she secures in any case the esteem of both sexes and the universal respect of her own. The loss is fleeting, the gain is permanent. What a joy for a noble heart, the pride of virtue combined with beauty. Let her be a heroine of romance, she will taste delights more exquisite than those of Lais and Cleopatra, and when her beauty is fled, her glory and her joys remain. She alone can enjoy the past. The harder and more important the duties, the stronger and clearer must be the reasons on which they are based. There is a sort of pious talk about the most serious subjects which is dinned in vain into the ears of young people. This talk, quite unsuited to their ideas and the small importance they attach to it in secret, inclines them to yield readily to their inclinations, for lack of any reasons for resistance drawn from the facts themselves. No doubt a girl brought up to goodness and piety has strong weapons against temptation, but one whose heart, or rather her ears, are merely filled with the jargon of piety, will certainly fall a prey to the first skilful seducer who attacks her. A young and beautiful girl will never despise her body, she will never really deplore sins which her beauty leads men to commit, she will never lament earnestly in the sight of God that she is an object of desire. She will never be convinced that the tenderest feeling is an invention of the evil one. Give her other and more pertinent reasons for her own sake, for these will have no effect. It will be worse to instill, as is often done, ideas which contradict each other, and after having humbled and degraded her person and her charms as the stain of sin, to bid her reverence that same vile body as the temple of Jesus Christ. Ideas too sublime and too humble are equally ineffective and they cannot both be true. A reason adapted to her age and sex is what is needed. Considerations of duty are of no effect unless they are combined with some motive for the performance of our duty. Quae quia non liceat non facit, illa facit. Ovid, Amor. I, 3. Eleg. 4. One would not suspect Ovid of such a harsh judgment. If you would inspire young people with a love of good conduct, avoid saying, "Be good," make it their interest to be good, make them feel the value of goodness and they will love it. It is not enough to show this effect in the distant future, show it now, in the relations of the present, in the character of their lovers. Describe a good man, a man of worth, teach them to recognize him when they see him, to love him for their own sake, convince them that such a man alone can make them happy as friend, wife, or mistress. Let reason lead the way to virtue. Make them feel that the empire of their sex and all the advantages derived from it depend not merely on the right conduct, the morality, of women, but also on that of men. That they have little hold over the vile and base, and that the lover is incapable of serving his mistress unless he can do homage to virtue. You may then be sure that when you describe the manners of our age you will inspire them with a genuine disgust, when you show them men of fashion they will despise them. You will give them a distaste for their maxims, an aversion to their sentiments, and a scorn for their empty gallantry. You will arouse a nobler ambition, to reign over great and strong souls, the ambition of the Spartan women to rule over men. A bold, shameless, intriguing woman, who can only attract her lovers by coquetry and retain them by her favors, wins a servile obedience in common things, in weighty and important matters she has no influence over them. But the woman who is both virtuous, wise, and charming, she who, in a word, combines love and esteem, can send them at her bidding to the end of the world, to war, to glory, and to death at her behest. This is a fine kingdom and worth the winning. This is the spirit in which Sophie has been educated, she has been trained carefully rather than strictly, and her taste has been followed rather than thwarted. Let us say just a word about her person, according to the description I have given to Emile and the picture he himself has formed of the wife in whom he hopes to find happiness. I cannot repeat too often that I am not dealing with prodigies. Emile is no prodigy, neither is Sophie. He is a man and she is a woman, this is all they have to boast of. In the present confusion between the sexes it is almost a miracle to belong to one's own sex. Sophie is well born and she has a good disposition, she is very warm-hearted, and this warmth of heart sometimes makes her imagination run away with her. Her mind is keen rather than accurate, her temper is pleasant but variable, her person pleasing though nothing out of the common, her countenance bespeaks a soul and it speaks true. You may meet her with indifference, but you will not leave her without emotion. Others possess good qualities which she lacks. Others possess her good qualities in a higher degree, but in no one are these qualities better blended to form a happy disposition. She knows how to make the best of her very faults, and if she were more perfect she would be less pleasing. Sophie is not beautiful, but in her presence men forget the fairer women, and the latter are dissatisfied with themselves. At first sight she is hardly pretty, but the more we see her the prettier she is. She wins where so many lose, and what she wins she keeps. Her eyes might be finer, her mouth more beautiful, her stature more imposing. But no one could have a more graceful figure, a finer complexion, a whiter hand, a daintier foot, a sweeter look, and a more expressive countenance. She does not dazzle, she arouses interest, she delights us, we know not why. Sophie is fond of dress, and she knows how to dress. Her mother has no other maid, she has taste enough to dress herself well, but she hates rich clothes, her own are always simple but elegant. She does not like showy but becoming things. She does not know what colors are fashionable, but she makes no mistake about those that suit her. No girl seems more simply dressed, but no one could take more pains over her toilet. No article is selected at random, and yet there is no trace of artificiality. Her dress is very modest in appearance and very coquettish in reality. She does not display her charms, she conceals them, but in such a way as to enhance them. When you see her you say, that is a good modest girl, but while you are with her, you cannot take your eyes or your thoughts off her, and one might say that this very simple adornment is only put on to be removed bit by the imagination. Sophie has natural gifts, she is aware of them, and they have not been neglected. But never having had a chance of much training she is content to use her pretty voice to sing tastefully and truly. Her little feet step lightly, easily, and gracefully, she can always make an easy graceful courtesy. She has had no singing master but her father, no dancing mistress but her mother. A neighboring organist has given her a few lessons in playing accompaniments on the spinet, and she has improved herself by practice. At first she only wished to show off her hand on the dark keys. Then she discovered that the thin clear tone of the spinet made her voice sound sweeter. Little by little she recognized the charms of harmony. As she grew older she at last began to enjoy the charms of expression, to love music for its own sake. But she has taste rather than talent, she cannot read a simple air from notes. Needlework is what Sophie likes best, and the feminine arts have been taught her most carefully, even those you would not expect, such as cutting out and dressmaking. There is nothing she cannot do with her needle, and nothing that she does not take a delight in doing. But lace-making is her favorite occupation, because there is nothing which requires such a pleasing attitude, nothing which calls for such grace and dexterity of finger. She has also studied all the details of housekeeping. She understands cooking and cleaning, she knows the prices of food, and also how to choose it. She can keep accounts accurately, she is her mother's housekeeper. Some day she will be the mother of a family. By managing her father's house she is preparing to manage her own, she can take the place of any of the servants and she is always ready to do so. You cannot give orders unless you can do the work yourself, that is why her mother sets her to do it. Sophie does not think of that, her first duty is to be a good daughter, and that is all she thinks about for the present. Her one idea is to help her mother and relieve her of some of her anxieties. However, she does not like them all equally well. For instance, she likes dainty food, but she does not like cooking, the details of cookery offend her, and things are never clean enough for her. She is extremely sensitive in this respect and carries her sensitiveness to a fault. She would let the whole dinner boil over into the fire rather than soil her cuffs. She has always disliked inspecting the kitchen garden for the same reason. The soil is dirty, and as soon as she sees the manure heap she fancies there is a disagreeable smell. This defect is the result of her mother's teaching. According to her, cleanliness is one of the most necessary of a woman's duties, a special duty, of the highest importance and a duty imposed by nature. Nothing could be more revolting than a dirty woman, and a husband who tires of her is not to blame. She insisted so strongly on this duty when Sophie was little, she required such absolute cleanliness in her person, clothing, room, work, and toilet, that use has become habit, till it absorbs one half of her time and controls the other. So that she thinks less of how to do a thing than of how to do it without getting dirty. Yet this has not degenerated into mere affectation and softness, there is none of the over-refinement of luxury. Nothing but clean water enters her room. She knows no perfumes but the scent of flowers, and her husband will never find anything sweeter than her breath. In conclusion, the attention she pays to the outside does not blind her to the fact that time and strength are meant for greater tasks. Either she does not know or she despises that exaggerated cleanliness of body which degrades the soul. Sophie is more than clean, she is pure. I said that Sophie was fond of good things. She was so by nature. But she became temperate by habit and now she is temperate by virtue. Little girls are not to be controlled, as little boys are, to some extent, through their greediness. This tendency may have ill effects on women and it is too dangerous to be left unchecked. When Sophie was little, she did not always return empty-handed if she was sent to her mother's cupboard, and she was not quite to be trusted with sweets and sugar almonds. Her mother caught her, took them from her, punished her, and made her go without her dinner. At last she managed to persuade her that sweets were bad for the teeth, and that overeating spoiled the figure. Thus Sophie overcame her faults. And when she grew older other tastes distracted her from this low kind of self-indulgence. With awakening feeling greediness ceases to be the ruling passion, both with men and women. Sophie has preserved her feminine tastes. She likes milk and sweets, she likes pastry and made dishes, but not much meat. She has never tasted wine or spirits, moreover, she eats sparingly. Women, who do not work so hard as men, have less waste to repair. In all things she likes what is good, and knows how to appreciate it, but she can also put up with what is not so good, or can go without it. Sophie's mind is pleasing but not brilliant, and thorough but not deep. It is the sort of mind which calls for no remark, as she never seems cleverer or stupider than oneself. When people talk to her they always find what she says attractive, though it may not be highly ornamental according to modern ideas of an educated woman. Her mind has been formed not only by reading, but by conversation with her father and mother, by her own reflections, and by her own observations in the little world in which she has lived. Sophie is naturally merry, as a child she was even giddy. But her mother cured her of her silly ways, little by little, lest too sudden a change should make her self-conscious. Thus she became modest and retiring while still a child, and now that she is a child no longer, she finds it easier to continue this conduct than it would have been to acquire it without knowing why. It is amusing to see her occasionally return to her old ways and indulge in childish mirth and then suddenly check herself, with silent lips, downcast eyes, and rosy blushes. Neither child nor woman, she may well partake of both. Sophie is too sensitive to be always good-humored, but too gentle to let this be really disagreeable to other people. It is only herself who suffers. If you say anything that hurts her she does not sulk, but her heart swells. She tries to run away and cry. In the midst of her tears, at a word from her father or mother she returns at once laughing and playing, secretly wiping her eyes and trying to stifle her sobs. Yet she has her whims. If her temper is too much indulged it degenerates into rebellion, and then she forgets herself. But give her time to come round and her way of making you forget her wrongdoing is almost a virtue. If you punish her she is gentle and submissive, and you see that she is more ashamed of the fault than the punishment. If you say nothing, she never fails to make amends, and she does it so frankly and so readily that you cannot be angry with her. She would kiss the ground before the lowest servant and would make no fuss about it, and as soon as she is forgiven, you can see by her delight and her caresses that a load is taken off her heart. In a word, she endures patiently the wrongdoing of others, and she is eager to atone for her own. This amiability is natural to her sex when unspoiled. Woman is made to submit to man and to endure even injustice at his hands. You will never bring young lads to this, their feelings rise in revolt against injustice, nature has not fitted them to put up with it. Gravum pellidi stomachum cedera nesciae. Horace, Lib. I. Ode 6. Sophie's religion is reasonable and simple, with few doctrines and fewer observances, or rather as she knows no course of conduct but the right, her whole life is devoted to the service of God and to doing good. In all her parents' teaching of religion she has been trained to a reverent submission. They have often said, "My little girl, this is too hard for you, your husband will teach you when you are grown up." Instead of long sermons about piety, they have been content to preach by their example, and this example is engraved on her heart. Sophie loves virtue, this love has come to be her ruling passion. She loves virtue because there is nothing fairer in itself, she loves it because it is a woman's glory and because a virtuous woman is little lower than the angels. She loves virtue as the only road to real happiness, because she sees nothing but poverty, neglect, unhappiness, shame, and disgrace in the life of a bad woman. She loves virtue because it is dear to her revered father and to her tender and worthy mother. They are not content to be happy in their own virtue, they desire hers, and she finds her chief happiness in the hope of making them happy. All these feelings inspire an enthusiasm which stirs her heart and keeps all its budding passions in subjection to this noble enthusiasm. Sophie will be chaste and good till her dying day. She has vowed it in her secret heart, and not before she knew how hard it would be to keep her vow. She made this vow at a time when she would have revoked it had she been the slave of her senses. Sophie is not so fortunate as to be a charming French woman, cold-hearted and vain, who would rather attract attention than give pleasure, who seeks amusement rather than delight. She suffers from a consuming desire for love. It even disturbs and troubles her heart in the midst of festivities. She has lost her former liveliness, and her taste for merry games. Far from being afraid of the tedium of solitude she desires it. Her thoughts go out to him who will make solitude sweet to her. She finds strangers tedious, she wants a lover, not a circle of admirers. She would rather give pleasure to one good man than be a general favorite, or win that applause of society which lasts but a day and tomorrow is turned to scorn. A woman's judgment develops sooner than a man's. Being on the defensive from her childhood up, and entrusted with a treasure so hard to keep, she is earlier acquainted with good and evil. Sophie is precocious by temperament in everything, and her judgment is more formed than that of most girls of her age. There is nothing strange in that, maturity is not always reached at the same age. Sophie has been taught the duties and rights of her own sex and of ours. She knows men's faults and women's vices, she also knows their corresponding good qualities and virtues, and has them by heart. No one can have a higher ideal of a virtuous woman, but she would rather think of a virtuous man, a man of true worth. She knows that she is made for such a man, that she is worthy of him, that she can make him as happy as he will make her. She is sure she will know him when she sees him, the difficulty is to find him. Women are by nature judges of a man's worth, as he is of theirs. This right is reciprocal, and it is recognized as such both by men and women. Sophie recognizes this right and exercises it, but with the modesty becoming her youth, her inexperience, and her position, she confines her judgment to what she knows, and she only forms an opinion when it may help to illustrate some useful precept. She is extremely careful what she says about those who are absent, particularly if they are women. She thinks that talking about each other makes women spiteful and satirical. So long as they only talk about men they are merely just. So Sophie stops there. As to women she never says anything at all about them, except to tell the good she knows. She thinks this is only fair to her sex, and if she knows no good of any woman, she says nothing, and that is enough. Sophie has little knowledge of society, but she is observant and obliging, and all that she does is full of grace. A happy disposition does more for her than much art. She has a certain courtesy of her own, which is not dependent on fashion, and does not change with its changes. It is not a matter of custom, but it arises from a feminine desire to please. She is unacquainted with the language of empty compliment, nor does she invent more elaborate compliments of her own. She does not say that she is greatly obliged, that you do her too much honor, that you should not take so much trouble, etc. Still less does she try to make phrases of her own. She responds to an attention or a customary piece of politeness by a courtesy or a mere, "thank you," but this phrase in her mouth is quite enough. If you do her a real service, she lets her heart speak, and its words are no empty compliment. She has never allowed French manners to make her a slave to appearances. When she goes from one room to another she does not take the arm of an old gentleman, whom she would much rather help. When a scented fop offers her this empty attention, she leaves him on the staircase and rushes into the room saying that she is not lame. Indeed, she will never wear high heels though she is not tall, her feet are small enough to dispense with them. Not only does she adopt a silent and respectful attitude towards women, but also towards married men, or those who are much older than herself. She will never take her place above them, unless compelled to do so. And she will return to her own lower place as soon as she can, for she knows that the rights of age take precedence of those of sex, as age is presumably wiser than youth, and wisdom should be held in the greatest honor. With young folks of her own age it is another matter, she requires a different manner to gain their respect, and she knows how to adopt it without dropping the modest ways which become her. If they themselves are shy and modest, she will gladly preserve the friendly familiarity of youth. Their innocent conversation will be merry but suitable. If they become serious they must say something useful. If they become silly, she soon puts a stop to it, for she has an utter contempt for the jargon of gallantry, which she considers an insult to her sex. She feels sure that the man she seeks does not speak that jargon, and she will never permit in another what would be displeasing to her in him whose character is engraved on her heart. Her high opinion of the rights of women, her pride in the purity of her feelings, that active virtue which is the basis of her self-respect, make her indignant at the sentimental speeches intended for her amusement. She does not receive them with open anger, but with a disconcerting irony or an unexpected iciness. If a fair Apollo displays his charms, and makes use of his wit in the praise of her wit, her beauty, and her grace, at the risk of offending him she is quite capable of saying politely, "Sir, I am afraid I know that better than you. If we have nothing more interesting to talk about, I think we may put an end to this conversation." To say this with a deep courtesy, and then to withdraw to a considerable distance, is the work of a moment. Ask your lady killers if it is easy to continue to babble to such an unsympathetic ear. It is not that she is not fond of praise if it is really sincere, and if she thinks you believe what you say. You must show that you appreciate her merit if you would have her believe you. Her proud spirit may take pleasure in homage which is based upon esteem, but empty compliments are always rejected. Sophie was not meant to practice the small arts of the dancing girl. With a judgment so mature, and a mind like that of a woman of 20, Sophie, at 15, is no longer treated as a child by her parents. No sooner do they perceive the first signs of youthful disquiet than they hasten to anticipate its development. Their conversations with her are wise and tender. These wise and tender conversations are in keeping with her age and disposition. If her disposition is what I fancy, why should not her father speak to her somewhat after this fashion? "You are a big girl now, Sophie, you will soon be a woman. We want you to be happy, for our own sakes as well as yours, for our happiness depends on yours. A good girl finds her own happiness in the happiness of a good man, so we must consider your marriage. We must think of it in good time, for marriage makes or mars our whole life, and we cannot have too much time to consider it. There is nothing so hard to choose as a good husband, unless it is a good wife. You will be that rare creature, Sophie, you will be the crown of our life and the blessing of our declining years, but however worthy you are, there are worthier people upon earth. There is no one who would not do himself honor by marriage with you. There are many who would do you even greater honor than themselves. Among these we must try to find one who suits you, we must get to know him and introduce you to him. The greatest possible happiness in marriage depends on so many points of agreement that it is folly to expect to secure them all. We must first consider the more important matters. If others are to be found along with them, so much the better. If not, we must do without them. Perfect happiness is not to be found in this world, but we can, at least, avoid the worst form of unhappiness, that for which ourselves are to blame. There is a natural suitability, there is a suitability of established usage, and a suitability which is merely conventional. Parents should decide as to the two latters, and the children themselves should decide as to the former. Marriages arranged by parents only depend on a suitability of custom and convention. It is not two people who are united, but two positions and two properties, but these things may change, the people remain, they are always there. And in spite of fortune, it is the personal relation that makes a happy or an unhappy marriage. Your mother had rank, I had wealth, this was all that our parents considered in arranging our marriage. I lost my money, she lost her position. Forgotten by her family, what good did it do her to be a lady born? In the midst of our misfortunes, the union of our hearts has outweighed them all, the similarity of our tastes led us to choose this retreat. We live happily in our poverty, we are all in all to each other. Sophie is a treasure we hold in common, and we thank heaven which has bestowed this treasure and deprived us of all others. You see, my child, whither we have been led by Providence. The conventional motives which brought about our marriage no longer exist, our happiness consists in that natural suitability which was held of no account. Husband and wife should choose each other. A mutual liking should be the first bond between them. They should follow the guidance of their own eyes and hearts. When they are married, their first duty will be to love one another, and as love and hatred do not depend on ourselves, this duty brings another with it, and they must begin to love each other before marriage. That is the law of nature, and no power can abrogate it. Those who have fettered it by so many legal restrictions have given heed rather to the outward show of order than to the happiness of marriage or the morals of the citizen. You see, my dear Sophie, we do not preach a harsh morality. It tends to make you your own mistress and to make us leave the choice of your husband to yourself. When we have told you our reasons for giving you full liberty, it is only fair to speak of your reasons for making a wise use of that liberty. My child, you are good and sensible, upright and pious, you have the accomplishments of a good woman, and you are not altogether without charms, but you are poor, you have the gifts most worthy of esteem, but not those which are most esteemed. Do not seek what is beyond your reach, and let your ambition be controlled, not by your ideas or ours, but by the opinion of others. If it were merely a question of equal merits, I know not what limits to impose on your hopes. But do not let your ambitions outrun your fortune, and remember it is very small. Although a man worthy of you would not consider this inequality an obstacle, you must do what he would not do. Sophie must follow her mother's example and only enter a family which counts it an honor to receive her. You never saw our wealth, you were born in our poverty, you make it sweet for us, and you share it without hardship. Believe me, Sophie, do not seek those good things we indeed thank heaven for having taken from us. We did not know what happiness was till we lost our money. You are so amiable that you will win affection, and you are not go poor as to be a burden. You will be sought in marriage, it may be by those who are unworthy of you. If they showed themselves in their true colors, you would rate them at their real value, all their outward show would not long deceive you. But though your judgment is good and you know what merit is when you see it, you are inexperienced and you do not know how people can conceal their real selves. A skillful knave might study your tastes in order to seduce you, and make a pretense of those virtues which he does not possess. You would be ruined, Sophie, before you knew what you were doing, and you would only perceive your error when you had cause to lament it. The most dangerous snare, the only snare which reason cannot avoid, is that of the senses. If ever you have the misfortune to fall into its toils, you will perceive nothing but fancies and illusions. Your eyes will be fascinated, your judgment troubled, your will corrupted, your very error will be dear to you, and even if you were able to perceive it you would not be willing to escape from it. My child, I trust you to Sophie's own reason. I do not trust you to the fancies of your own heart. Judge for yourself so long as your heart is untouched, but when you love betake yourself to your mother's care. I propose a treaty between us which shows our esteem for you, and restores the order of nature between us. Parents choose a husband for their daughter and she is only consulted as a matter of form, that is the custom. We shall do just the opposite, you will choose, and we shall be consulted. Use your right, Sophie, use it freely and wisely. The husband suitable for you should be chosen by you, not us. But it is for us to judge whether he is really suitable, or whether, without knowing it, you are only following your own wishes. Birth, wealth, position, conventional opinions will count for nothing with us. Choose a good man whose person and character suit you, whatever he may be in other respects, we will accept him as our son-in-law. He will be rich enough if he has bodily strength, a good character, and family affection. His position will be good enough if it is ennobled by virtue. If everybody blames us, we do not care. We do not seek the approbation of men, but your happiness. I cannot tell my readers what effect such words would have upon girls brought up in their fashion. As for Sophie, she will have no words to reply, shame and emotion will not permit her to express herself easily. But I am sure that what was said will remain engraved upon her heart as long as she lives, and that if any human resolution may be trusted, we may rely on her determination to deserve her parents' esteem. At worst let us suppose her endowed with an ardent disposition which will make her impatient of long delays. I maintain that her judgment, her knowledge, her taste, her refinement, and, above all, the sentiments in which she has been brought up from childhood, will outweigh the impetuosity of the senses, and enable her to offer a prolonged resistance. If not to overcome them altogether. She would rather die a virgin martyr than distress her parents by marrying a worthless man and exposing herself to the unhappiness of an ill-assorted marriage. Ardent as an Italian and sentimental as an Englishwoman, she has a curb upon heart and sense in the pride of a Spaniard, who even when she seeks a lover does not easily discover one worthy of her. Not every one can realize the motive power to be found in a love of what is right, nor the inner strength which results from a genuine love of virtue. There are men who think that all greatness is a figment of the brain, men who with their vile and degraded reason will never recognize the power over human passions which is wielded by the very madness of virtue. You can only teach such men by examples. If they persist in denying their existence, so much the worse for them. If I told them that Sophie is no imaginary person, that her name alone is my invention, that her education, her conduct, her character, her very features, really existed, and that her loss is still mourned by a very worthy family, they would, no doubt, refuse to believe me. But indeed why should I not venture to relate word for word the story of a girl so like Sophie that this story might be hers without surprising any one? Believe it or no, it is all the same to me, call my history fiction if you will. In any case I have explained my method and furthered my purpose. This young girl with the temperament which I have attributed to Sophie was so like her in other respects that she was worthy of the name, and so we will continue to use it. After the conversation related above, her father and mother thought that suitable husbands would not be likely to offer themselves in the hamlet where they lived. So they decided to send her to spend the winter in town, under the care of an aunt who was privately acquainted with the object of the journey, for Sophie's heart throbbed with noble pride at the thought of her self-control. And however much she might want to marry, she would rather have died a maid than have brought herself to go in search of a husband. In response to her parents' wishes her aunt introduced her to her friends, took her into company, both private and public, showed her society, or rather showed her in society, for Sophie paid little heed to its bustle. Yet it was plain that she did not shrink from young men of pleasing appearance and modest seemly behavior. Her very shyness had a charm of its own, which was very much like coquetry, but after talking to them once or twice she repulsed them. She soon exchanged that air of authority which seems to accept men's homage for a humbler bearing and a still more chilling politeness. Always watchful over her conduct, she gave them no chance of doing her the least service. It was perfectly plain that she was determined not to accept any one of them. Never did sensitive heart take pleasure in noisy amusements, the empty and barren delights of those who have no feelings, those who think that a merry life is a happy life. Sophie did not find what she sought, and she felt sure she never would, so she got tired of the town. She loved her parents dearly and nothing made up for their absence, nothing could make her forget them. She went home long before the time fixed for the end of her visit. Scarcely had she resumed her home duties when they perceived that her temper had changed though her conduct was unaltered, she was forgetful, impatient, sad, and dreamy. She wept in secret. At first they thought she was in love and was ashamed to own it. They spoke to her, but she repudiated the idea. She protested she had seen no one who could touch her heart, and Sophie always spoke the truth. Yet her languor steadily increased, and her health began to give way. Her mother was anxious about her, and determined to know the reason for this change. She took her aside, and with the winning speech and the irresistible caresses which only a mother can employ, she said, "My child, whom I have borne beneath my heart, whom I bear ever in my affection, confide your secret to your mother's bosom." What secrets are these which a mother may not know? Who pities your sufferings, who shares them, who would gladly relieve them, if not your father and myself? Ah, my child! Would you have me die of grief for your sorrow without letting me share it? Far from hiding her griefs from her mother, the young girl asked nothing better than to have her as friend and comforter. But she could not speak for shame, her modesty could find no words to describe a condition so unworthy of her, as the emotion which disturbed her senses in spite of all her efforts. At length her very shame gave her mother a clue to her difficulty, and she drew from her the humiliating confession. Far from distressing her with reproaches or unjust blame, she consoled her, pitied her, wept over her. She was too wise to make a crime of an evil which virtue alone made so cruel. But why put up with such an evil when there was no necessity to do so, when the remedy was so easy and so legitimate? Why did she not use the freedom they had granted her? Why did she not take a husband? Why did she not make her choice? Did she not know that she was perfectly independent in this matter, that whatever her choice, it would be approved, for it was sure to be good? They had sent her to town, but she would not stay. Many suitors had offered themselves, but she would have none of them. What did she expect? What did she want? What an inexplicable contradiction. The reply was simple. If it were only a question of the partner of her youth, her choice would soon be made, but a master for life is not so easily chosen. And since the two cannot be separated, people must often wait and sacrifice their youth before they find the man with whom they could spend their life. Such was Sophie's case. She wanted a lover, but this lover must be her husband. And to discover a heart such as she required, a lover and husband were equally difficult to find. All these dashing young men were only her equals in age, in everything else they were found lacking. Their empty wit, their vanity, their affectations of speech, their ill-regulated conduct, their frivolous imitations alike disgusted her. She sought a man and she found monkeys, she sought a soul and there was none to be found. "How unhappy I am!" said she to her mother, "I am compelled to love and yet I am dissatisfied with every one. My heart rejects every one who appeals to my senses. Every one of them stirs my passions and all alike revolt them. A liking unaccompanied by respect cannot last. That is not the sort of man for your Sophie, the delightful image of her ideal is too deeply graven in her heart. She can love no other. She can make no one happy but him, and she cannot be happy without him. She would rather consume herself in ceaseless conflicts, she would rather die free and wretched, than driven desperate by the company of a man she did not love, a man she would make as unhappy as herself. She would rather die than live to suffer." Amazed at these strange ideas, her mother found them so peculiar that she could not fail to suspect some mystery. Sophie was neither affected nor absurd. How could such exaggerated delicacy exist in one who had been so carefully taught from her childhood to adapt herself to those with whom she must live, and to make a virtue of necessity? This ideal of the delightful man with which she was so enchanted, who appeared so often in her conversation, made her mother suspect that there was some foundation for her caprices which was still unknown to her, and that Sophie had not told her all. The unhappy girl, overwhelmed with her secret grief, was only too eager to confide it to another. Her mother urged her to speak, she hesitated, she yielded, and leaving the room without a word, she presently returned with a book in her hand. "Have pity on your unhappy daughter, there is no remedy for her grief, her tears cannot be dried. You would know the cause, well, here it is," said she, flinging the book on the table. Her mother took the book and opened it. It was the Adventures of Telemachus. At first she could make nothing of this riddle. By dint of questions and vague replies, she discovered to her great surprise that her daughter was the rival of Eucharis. Sophie was in love with Telemachus, and loved him with a passion which nothing could cure. When her father and mother became aware of her infatuation, they laughed at it and tried to cure her by reasoning with her. They were mistaken, reason was not altogether on their side. Sophie had her own reason and knew how to use it. Many a time did she reduce them to silence by turning their own arguments against them, by showing them that it was all their own fault for not having trained her to suit the men of that century. That she would be compelled to adopt her husband's way of thinking or he must adopt hers, that they had made the former course impossible by the way she had been brought up, and that the latter was just what she wanted. "Give me," said she, "a man who holds the same opinions as I do, or one who will be willing to learn them from me, and I will marry him. But until then, why do you scold me? Pity me, I am miserable, but not mad. Is the heart controlled by the will? Did my father not ask that very question? Is it my fault if I love what has no existence? I am no visionary, I desire no prince, I seek no Telemachus, I know he is only an imaginary person, I seek someone like him. And why should there be no such person, since there is such a person as I who feel that my heart is like his? No, let us not wrong humanity so greatly, let us not think that an amiable and virtuous man is a figment of the imagination. He exists, he lives, perhaps he is seeking me, he is seeking a soul which is capable of love for him. But who is he, where is he? I know not, he is not among those I have seen, and no doubt I shall never see him. Oh! Mother, why did you make virtue too attractive? If I can love nothing less, you are more to blame than I. Must I continue this sad story to its close? Must I describe the long struggles which preceded it? Must I show an impatient mother exchanging her former caresses for severity? Must I paint an angry father forgetting his former promises, and treating the most virtuous of daughters as a mad woman? Must I portray the unhappy girl, more than ever devoted to her imaginary hero, because of the persecution brought upon her by that devotion, drawing nearer step by step to her death, and descending into the grave when they were about to force her to the altar? No, I will not dwell upon these gloomy scenes. I have no need to go so far to show, by what I consider a sufficiently striking example, that in spite of the prejudices arising from the manners of our age, the enthusiasm for the good and the beautiful is no more foreign to women than to men. And that there is nothing which, under nature's guidance, cannot be obtained from them as well as from us. You stop me here to inquire whether it is nature which teaches us to take such pains to repress our immoderate desires. No, I reply, but neither is it nature who gives us these immoderate desires. Now, all that is not from nature is contrary to nature, as I have proved again and again. Let us give Emile his Sophie, let us restore this sweet girl to life and provide her with a less vivid imagination and a happier fate. I desired to paint an ordinary woman, but by endowing her with a great soul, I have disturbed her reason. I have gone astray. Let us retrace our steps. Sophie has only a good disposition and an ordinary heart. Her education is responsible for everything in which she excels other women. In this book I intended to describe all that might be done and to leave every one free to choose what he could out of all the good things I described. I meant to train a helpmeet for Emile, from the very first, and to educate them for each other and with each other. But on consideration I thought all these premature arrangements undesirable. For it was absurd to plan the marriage of two children before I could tell whether this union was in accordance with nature and whether they were really suited to each other. We must not confuse what is suitable in a state of savagery with what is suitable in civilized life. In the former, any woman will suit any man, for both are still in their primitive and undifferentiated condition. In the latter, all their characteristics have been developed by social institutions, and each mind, having taken its own settled form, not from education alone, but by the cooperation, more or less well regulated, of natural disposition and education, we can only make a match by introducing them to each other to see if they suit each other in every respect, or at least we can let them make that choice which gives the most promise of mutual suitability. The difficulty is this: while social life develops character, it differentiates classes, and these two classifications do not correspond, so that the greater the social distinctions, the greater the difficulty of finding the corresponding character. Hence we have ill-assorted marriages and all their accompanying evils, and we find that it follows logically that the further we get from equality, the greater the change in our natural feelings. The wider the distance between great and small, the looser the marriage tie, the deeper the gulf between rich and poor, the fewer husbands and fathers. Neither master nor slave belongs to a family, but only to a class. If you would guard against these abuses, and secure happy marriages, you must stifle your prejudices, forget human institutions, and consult nature. Do not join together those who are only alike in one given condition, those who will not suit one another if that condition is changed. But those who are adapted to one another in every situation, in every country, and in every rank in which they may be placed. I do not say that conventional considerations are of no importance in marriage, but I do say that the influence of natural relations is so much more important, that our fate in life is decided by them alone. And that there is such an agreement of taste, temper, feeling, and disposition as should induce a wise father, though he were a prince, to marry his son, without a moment's hesitation, to the woman so adapted to him, were she born in a bad home. Were she even the hangman's daughter. I maintain indeed that every possible misfortune may overtake husband and wife if they are thus united, yet they will enjoy more real happiness while they mingle their tears, than if they possessed all the riches of the world. Poisoned by divided hearts. Instead of providing a wife for Emile in childhood, I have waited till I knew what would suit him. It is not for me to decide, but for nature. My task is to discover the choice she has made. My business, mine I repeat, not his father's. For when he entrusted his son to my care, he gave up his place to me. He gave me his rights. It is I who am really Emile's father, it is I who have made a man of him. I would have refused to educate him if I were not free to marry him according to his own choice, which is mine. Nothing but the pleasure of bestowing happiness on a man can repay me for the cost of making him capable of happiness. Do not suppose, however, that I have delayed to find a wife for Emile till I sent him in search of her. This search is only a pretext for acquainting him with women, so that he may perceive the value of a suitable wife. Sophie was discovered long since. Emile may even have seen her already, but he will not recognize her till the time is come. Although equality of rank is not essential in marriage, yet this equality along with other kinds of suitability increases their value. It is not to be weighed against any one of them, but, other things being equal, it turns the scale. A man, unless he is a king, cannot seek a wife in any and every class. If he himself is free from prejudices, he will find them in others, and this girl or that might perhaps suit him, and yet she would be beyond his reach. A wise father will therefore restrict his inquiries within the bounds of prudence. He should not wish to marry his pupil into a family above his own, for that is not within his power. If he could do so, he ought not desire it. For what difference does rank make to a young man, at least to my pupil? Yet, if he rises, he is exposed to all sorts of real evils which he will feel all his life long. I even say that he should not try to adjust the balance between different gifts, such as rank and money, for each of these adds less to the value of the other than the amount deducted from its own value in the process of adjustment. Moreover, we can never agree as to a common denominator, and finally the preference, which each feels for his own surroundings, paves the way for discord between the two families and often to difficulties between husband and wife. It makes a considerable difference as to the suitability of a marriage whether a man marries above or beneath him. The former case is quite contrary to reason, the latter is more in conformity with reason. As the family is only connected with society through its head, it is the rank of that head which decides that of the family as a whole. When he marries into a lower rank, a man does not lower himself, he raises his wife. If, on the other hand, he marries above his position, he lowers his wife and does not raise himself. Thus there is in the first case good unmixed with evil, in the other evil unmixed with good. Moreover, the law of nature bids the woman obey the man. If he takes a wife from a lower class, natural and civil law are in accordance and all goes well. When he marries a woman of higher rank it is just the opposite case. The man must choose between diminished rights or imperfect gratitude, he must be ungrateful or despised. Then the wife, laying claim to authority, makes herself a tyrant over her lawful head. And the master, who has become a slave, is the most ridiculous and miserable of creatures. Such are the unhappy favorites whom the sovereigns of Asia honor and torment with their alliance. People tell us that if they desire to sleep with their wife they must enter by the foot of the bed. I expect that many of my readers will remember that I think women have a natural gift for managing men, and will accuse me of contradicting myself. Yet they are mistaken. There is a vast difference between claiming the right to command, and managing him who commands. Woman's reign is a reign of gentleness, tact, and kindness, her commands are caresses, her threats are tears. She should reign in the home as a minister reigns in the state, by contriving to be ordered to do what she wants. In this sense, I grant you, that the best managed homes are those where the wife has most power. But when she despises the voice of her head, when she desires to usurp his rights and take the command upon herself, this inversion of the proper order of things leads only to misery, scandal, and dishonor. There remains the choice between our equals and our inferiors, and I think we ought also to make certain restrictions with regard to the latter, for it is hard to find in the lowest stratum of society a woman who is able to make a good man happy. Not that the lower classes are more vicious than the higher, but because they have so little idea of what is good and beautiful, and because the injustice of other classes makes its very vices seem right in the eyes of this class. By nature man thinks but seldom. He learns to think as he acquires the other arts, but with even greater difficulty. In both sexes alike I am only aware of two really distinct classes, those who think and those who do not. And this difference is almost entirely one of education. A man who thinks should not ally himself with a woman who does not think, for he loses the chief delight of social life if he has a wife who cannot share his thoughts. People who spend their whole life in working for a living have no ideas beyond their work and their own interests, and their mind seems to reside in their arms. This ignorance is not necessarily unfavorable either to their honesty or their morals. It is often favorable, we often content ourselves with thinking about our duties, and in the end we substitute words for things. Conscience is the most enlightened philosopher. To be an honest man we need not read Cicero's De Officiis, and the most virtuous woman in the world is probably she who knows least about virtue. But it is none the less true that a cultivated mind alone makes intercourse pleasant, and it is a sad thing for a father of a family, who delights in his home, to be forced to shut himself up in himself and to be unable to make himself understood. Moreover, if a woman is quite unaccustomed to think, how can she bring up her children? How will she know what is good for them? How can she incline them to virtues of which she is ignorant, to merit of which she has no conception? She can only flatter or threaten, she can only make them insolent or timid, she will make them performing monkeys or noisy little rascals, she will never make them intelligent or pleasing children. Therefore it is not fitting that a man of education should choose a wife who has none, or take her from a class where she cannot be expected to have any education. But I would 1,000 times rather have a homely girl, simply brought up, than a learned lady in a wit who would make a literary circle of my house and install herself as its president. A female wit is a scourge to her husband, her children, her friends, her servants, to everybody. From the lofty height of her genius she scorns every womanly duty, and she is always trying to make a man of herself after the fashion of Emile. De l'Enclos. Outside her home she always makes herself ridiculous, and she is very rightly a butt for criticism, as we always are when we try to escape from our own position into one for which we are unfitted. These highly talented women only get a hold over fools. We can always tell what artist or friend holds the pen or pencil when they are at work, we know what discreet man of letters dictates their oracles in private. This trickery is unworthy of a decent woman. If she really had talents, her pretentiousness would degrade them. Her honor is to be unknown, her glory is the respect of her husband, her joys the happiness of her family. I appeal to my readers to give me an honest answer. When you enter a woman's room, what makes you think more highly of her, what makes you address her with more respect, to see her busy with feminine occupations, with her household duties, with her children's clothes about her? Or to find her writing verses at her toilet table surrounded with pamphlets of every kind and with notes on tinted paper? If there were none but wise men upon earth, such a woman would die an old maid. Queries cur nolum te ducere, Gala. Deserta es. Martial 11. 20. Looks must next be considered. They are the first thing that strikes us, and they ought to be the last, still they should not count for nothing. I think that great beauty is rather to be shunned than sought after in marriage. Possession soon exhausts our appreciation of beauty. In 6 weeks' time we think no more about it, but its dangers endure as long as life itself. Unless a beautiful woman is an angel, her husband is the most miserable of men. And even if she were an angel, he would still be the center of a hostile crowd, and she could not prevent it. If extreme ugliness were not repulsive, I should prefer it to extreme beauty. For before very long the husband would cease to notice either, but beauty would still have its disadvantages and ugliness its advantages. But ugliness which is actually repulsive is the worst misfortune. Repulsion increases rather than diminishes, and it turns to hatred. Such a union is a hell upon earth, better death than such a marriage. Desire mediocrity in all things, even in beauty. A pleasant attractive countenance, which inspires kindly feelings rather than love, is what we should prefer. The husband runs no risk, and the advantages are common to husband and wife. Charm is less perishable than beauty. It is a living thing, which constantly renews itself, and after 30 years of married life, the charms of a good woman delight her husband even as they did on the wedding day. Such are the considerations which decided my choice of Sophie. Brought up, like Emile, by nature, she is better suited to him than any other. She will be his true mate. She is his equal in birth and character, his inferior in fortune. She makes no great impression at first sight, but day by day reveals fresh charms. Her chief influence only takes effect gradually, it is only discovered in friendly intercourse, and her husband will feel it more than any one. Her education is neither showy nor neglected, she has taste without deep study, talent without art, judgment without learning. Her mind knows little, but it is trained to learn, it is well-tilled soil ready for the sower. She has read no book but Bareme and Telemachus which happened to fall into her hands, but no girl who can feel so passionately towards Telemachus can have a heart without feeling or a mind without discernment. What charming ignorance! Happy is he who is destined to be her tutor. She will not be her husband's teacher but his scholar, far from seeking to control his tastes, she will share them. She will suit him far better than a blue stocking, and he will have the pleasure of teaching her everything. It is time they made acquaintance, let us try to plan a meeting. When we left Paris we were sorrowful and wrapped in thought. This Babel is not our home. Emile casts a scornful glance towards the great city, saying angrily, "What a time we have wasted, the bride of my heart is not there." My friend, you knew it, but you think nothing of my time, and you pay no heed to my sufferings. With steady look and firm voice I reply, "Emile, do you mean what you say?" At once he flings his arms round my neck and clasps me to his breast without speaking. That is his answer when he knows he is in the wrong. And now we are wandering through the country like true knights-errant. Yet we are not seeking adventures when we leave Paris, we are escaping from them, now fast now slow, we wander through the country like knights-errants. By following my usual practice the taste for it has become established. And I do not suppose any of my readers are such slaves of custom as to picture us dozing in a post-chaise with closed windows, travelling, yet seeing nothing, observing nothing, making the time between our start and our arrival a mere blank. And losing in the speed of our journey, the time we meant to save. Men say life is short, and I see them doing their best to shorten it. As they do not know how to spend their time they lament the swiftness of its flight, and I perceive that for them it goes only too slowly. Intent merely on the object of their pursuit, they behold unwillingly the space between them and it, one desires tomorrow, another looks a month ahead, another 10 years beyond that. No one wants to live today, no one contents himself with the present hour, all complain that it passes slowly. When they complain that time flies, they lie, they would gladly purchase the power to hasten it. They would gladly spend their fortune to get rid of their whole life. And there is probably not a single one who would not have reduced his life to a few hours if he had been free to get rid of those hours he found tedious, and those which separated him from the desired moment. A man spends his whole life rushing from Paris to Versailles, from Versailles to Paris, from town to country, from country to town, from one district of the town to another. But he would not know what to do with his time if he had not discovered this way of wasting it, by leaving his business on purpose to find something to do and coming back to it. He thinks he is saving the time he spends, which would otherwise be unoccupied, or maybe he rushes for the sake of rushing, and travels post in order to return in the same fashion. When will mankind cease to slander nature? Why do you complain that life is short when it is never short enough for you? If there were but one of you, able to moderate his desires, so that he did not desire the flight of time, he would never find life too short. For him life and the joy of life would be one and the same. Should he die young, he would still die full of days. If this were the only advantage of my way of traveling, it would be enough. I have brought Emile up neither to desire nor to wait, but to enjoy, and when his desires are bent upon the future, their ardor is not so great as to make time seem tedious. He will not only enjoy the delights of longing, but the delights of approaching the object of his desires, and his passions are under such restraint that he lives to a great extent in the present. So we do not travel like couriers but like explorers. We do not merely consider the beginning and the end, but the space between. The journey itself is a delight. We do not travel sitting, dismally imprisoned, so to speak, in a tightly closed cage. We do not travel with the ease and comfort of ladies. We do not deprive ourselves of the fresh air, nor the sight of the things about us, nor the opportunity of examining them at our pleasure. Emile will never enter a post-chaise, nor will he ride post unless in a great hurry. But what cause has Emile for haste? None but the joy of life. Shall I add to this the desire to do good when he can? No, for that is itself one of the joys of life. I can only think of one way of traveling pleasanter than traveling on horseback, and that is to travel on foot. You start at your own time, you stop when you will, you do as much or as little as you choose. You see the country, you turn off to the right or left, you examine anything which interests you, you stop to admire every view. Do I see a stream, I wander by its banks, a leafy wood, I seek its shade, a cave, I enter it. A quarry, I study its geology. If I like a place, I stop there. As soon as I am weary of it, I go on. I am independent of horses and postilions, I need not stick to regular routes or good roads, I go anywhere where a man can go. I see all that a man can see, and as I am quite independent of everybody, I enjoy all the freedom man can enjoy. If I am stopped by bad weather and I find myself getting bored, then I take horses. If I am tired, but Emile is hardly ever tired. He is strong, why should he get tired? There is no hurry. If he stops, why should he be bored? He always finds some amusement. He works at a trade, he uses his arms to rest his feet. To travel on foot is to travel in the fashion of Thales, Plato, and Pythagoras. I find it hard to understand how a philosopher can bring himself to travel in any other way. How he can tear himself from the study of the wealth which lies before his eyes and beneath his feet. Is there anyone with an interest in agriculture, who does not want to know the special products of the district through which he is passing, and their method of cultivation? Is there anyone with a taste for natural history, who can pass a piece of ground without examining it, a rock without breaking off a piece of it, hills without looking for plants, and stones without seeking for fossils? Your town-bred scientists study natural history in cabinets, they have small specimens, they know their names but nothing of their nature. Emile's museum is richer than that of kings, it is the whole world. Everything is in its right place. The naturalist who is its curator has taken care to arrange it in the fairest order, Dauberton could do no better. What varied pleasures we enjoy in this delightful way of traveling, not to speak of increasing health and a cheerful spirit. I notice that those who ride in nice, well-padded carriages are always wrapped in thought, gloomy, fault-finding, or sick, while those who go on foot are always merry, light-hearted, and delighted with everything. How cheerful we are when we get near our lodging for the night. How savory is the coarse food. How we linger at table enjoying our rest. How soundly we sleep on a hard bed. If you only want to get to a place you may ride in a postchaise. If you want to travel you must go on foot. If Sophie is not forgotten before we have gone 50 leagues in the way I propose, either I am a bungler or Emile lacks curiosity. For with an elementary knowledge of so many things, it is hardly to be supposed that he will not be tempted to extend his knowledge. It is knowledge that makes us curious, and Emile knows just enough to want to know more. One thing leads on to another, and we make our way forward. If I chose a distant object for the end of our first journey, it is not difficult to find an excuse for it. When we leave Paris we must seek a wife at a distance. A few days later we had wandered further than usual among hills and valleys where no road was to be seen and we lost our way completely. No matter, all roads are alike if they bring you to your journey's end, but if you are hungry they must lead somewhere. Luckily we came across a peasant who took up to his cottage. We enjoyed his poor dinner with a hearty appetite. When he saw how hungry and tired we were he said, "If the Lord had led you to the other side of the hill you would have had a better welcome, you would have found a good resting place, such good, kindly people. They could not wish to do more for you than I, but they are richer, though folks say they used to be much better off. Still they are not reduced to poverty, and the whole countryside is the better for what they have." When Emile heard of these good people his heart warmed to them. "My friend," said he, looking at me, "let us visit this house, whose owners are a blessing to the district. I shall be very glad to see them. Perhaps they will be pleased to see us too. I am sure we shall be welcome, we shall just suit each other." Our host told us how to find our way to the house and we set off, but lost our way in the woods. We were caught in a heavy rainstorm, which delayed us further. At last we found the right path and in the evening we reached the house, which had been described to us. It was the only house among the cottages of the little hamlet, and though plain it had an air of dignity. We went up to the door and asked for hospitality. We were taken to the owner of the house, who questioned us courteously. Without telling him the object of our journey, we told him why we had left our path. His former wealth enabled him to judge a man's position by his manners. Those who have lived in society are rarely mistaken. With this passport we were admitted. The room we were shown into was very small, but clean and comfortable. A fire was lighted, and we found linen, clothes, and everything we needed. "Why," said Emile, in astonishment, "one would think they were expecting us." The peasant was quite right. How kind and attentive, how considerate, and for strangers too. I shall think I am living in the times of Homer. "I am glad you feel this," said I, "but you need not be surprised. Where strangers are scarce, they are welcome. Nothing makes people more hospitable than the fact that calls upon their hospitality are rare. When guests are frequent there is an end to hospitality. In Homer's time, people rarely traveled, and travelers were everywhere welcome. Very likely we are the only people who have passed this way this year." "Never mind," said he, "to know how to do without guests and yet to give them a kind welcome, is its own praise." Having dried ourselves and changed our clothes, we rejoined the master of the house, who introduced us to his wife. She received us not merely with courtesy but with kindness. Her glance rested on Emile. A mother, in her position, rarely receives a young man into her house without some anxiety or some curiosity at least. Supper was hurried forward on our account. When we went into the dining room there were 5 places laid. We took our seats and the 5th chair remained empty. Presently a young girl entered, made a deep courtesy, and modestly took her place without a word. Emile was busy with his supper or considering how to reply to what was said to him. He bowed to her and continued talking and eating. The main object of his journey was as far from his thoughts as he believed himself to be from the end of his journey. The conversation turned upon our losing our way. "Sir," said the master of the house to Emile, "you seem to be a pleasant well-behaved young gentleman, and that reminds me that your tutor and you arrived wet and weary like Telemachus and Mentor in the island of Calypso." "Indeed," said Emile, "we have found the hospitality of Calypso." His mentor added, "and the charms of Eucharis." But Emile knew the Odyssey and he had not read Telemachus, so he knew nothing of Eucharis. As for the young girl, I saw she blushed up to her eyebrows, fixed her eyes on her plate, and hardly dared to breathe. Her mother, noticing her confusion, made a sign to her father to turn the conversation. When he talked of his lonely life, he unconsciously began to relate the circumstances which brought him into it. His misfortunes, his wife's fidelity, the consolations they found in their marriage, their quiet, peaceful life in their retirement, and all this without a word of the young girl. It is a pleasing and a touching story, which cannot fail to interest. Emile, interested and sympathetic, leaves off eating and listens. When finally this best of men discourses with delight of the affection of the best of women, the young traveller, carried away by his feelings, stretches one hand to the husband, and taking the wife's hand with the other, he kisses it rapturously and bathes it with his tears. Everybody is charmed with the simple enthusiasm of the young man, but the daughter, more deeply touched than the rest by this evidence of his kindly heart, is reminded of Telemachus weeping for the woes of Philoctetus. She looks at him shyly, the better to study his countenance. There is nothing in it to give the lie to her comparison. His easy bearing shows freedom without pride, his manners are lively but not boisterous. Sympathy makes his glance softer and his expression more pleasing. The young girl, seeing him weep, is ready to mingle her tears with his. With so good an excuse for tears, she is restrained by a secret shame. She blames herself already for the tears which tremble on her eyelids, as though it were wrong to weep for one's family. Her mother, who has been watching her ever since she sat down to supper, sees her distress, and to relieve it she sends her on some errand. The daughter returns directly, but so little recovered that her distress is apparent to all. Her mother says gently, "Sophie, control yourself. Will you never cease to weep for the misfortunes of your parents? Why should you, who are their chief comfort, be more sensitive than they are themselves?" At the name of Sophie you would have seen Emile give a start. His attention is arrested by this dear name, and he awakes all at once and looks eagerly at one who dares to bear it. "Sophie! Are you the Sophie whom my heart is seeking? Is it you that I love?" He looks at her, he watches her with a sort of fear and self-distrust. The face is not quite what he pictured, he cannot tell whether he likes it more or less. He studies every feature, he watches every movement, every gesture, he has 100 fleeting interpretations for them all. He would give half his life if she would but speak. He looks at me anxiously and uneasily. His eyes are full of questions and reproaches. His every glance seems to say, "Guide me while there is yet time. If my heart yields itself and is deceived, I shall never get over it." There is no one in the world less able to conceal his feelings than Emile. How should he conceal them, in the midst of the greatest disturbance he has ever experienced, and under the eyes of 4 spectators who are all watching him, while she who seems to heed him least is really most occupied with him? His uneasiness does not escape the keen eyes of Sophie. His own eyes tell her that she is its cause. She sees that this uneasiness is not yet love. What matter? He is thinking of her, and that is enough. She will be very unlucky if he thinks of her with impunity. Mothers, like daughters, have eyes, and they have experience too. Sophie's mother smiles at the success of our schemes. She reads the hearts of the young people. She sees that the time has come to secure the heart of this new Telemachus. She makes her daughter speak. Her daughter, with her native sweetness, replies in a timid tone which makes all the more impression. At the first sound of her voice, Emile surrenders. It is Sophie herself, there can be no doubt about it. If it were not so, it would be too late to deny it. The charms of this maiden enchantress rush like torrents through his heart, and he begins to drain the draughts of poison with which he is intoxicated. He says nothing, questions pass unheeded, he sees only Sophie, he hears only Sophie. If she says a word, he opens his mouth, if her eyes are cast down, so are his. If he sees her sigh, he sighs too. It is Sophie's heart which seems to speak in his. What a change have these few moments wrought in her heart! It is no longer her turn to tremble, it is Emile's. Farewell liberty, simplicity, frankness. Confused, embarrassed, fearful, he dare not look about him for fear he should see that we are watching him. Ashamed that we should read his secret, he would fain become invisible to every one, that he might feed in secret on the sight of Sophie. Sophie, on the other hand, regains her confidence at the sight of Emile's fear. She sees her triumph and rejoices in it. Noel mostra gia, ben che in sua soareni rida. Tasso, Jerus. Delaware, c. 4. v. 33. Her expression remains unchanged. But in spite of her modest look and downcast eyes, her tender heart is throbbing with joy, and it tells her that she has found Telemachus. If I relate the plain and simple tale of their innocent affections, you will accuse me of frivolity, but you will be mistaken. Sufficient attention is not given to the effect which the first connection between man and woman is bound to produce on the future life of both. People do not see that a first impression so vivid as that of love, or the liking which takes the place of love, produces lasting effects whose influence continues till death. Works on education are crammed with wordy and unnecessary accounts of the imaginary duties of children. But there is not a word about the most important and most difficult part of their education, the crisis which forms the bridge between the child and the man. If any part of this work is really useful, it will be because I have dwelt at great length on this matter, so essential in itself and so neglected by other authors. And because I have not allowed myself to be discouraged either by false delicacy or by the difficulties of expression. The story of human nature is a fair romance. Am I to blame if it is not found elsewhere? I am trying to write the history of mankind. If my book is a romance, the fault lies with those who deprave mankind. This is supported by another reason. We are not dealing with a youth given over from childhood to fear, greed, envy, pride, and all those passions which are the common tools of the schoolmaster. We have to do with a youth who is not only in love for the first time, but with one who is also experiencing his first passion of any kind. Very likely it will be the only strong passion he will ever know, and upon it depends the final formation of his character. His mode of thought, his feelings, his tastes, determined by a lasting passion, are about to become so fixed that they will be incapable of further change. You will easily understand that Emile and I do not spend the whole of the night which follows after such an evening in sleep. Why? Do you mean to tell me that a wise man should be so much affected by a mere coincidence of name? Is there only one Sophie in the world? Are they all alike in heart and in name? Is every Sophie he meets his Sophie? Is he mad to fall in love with a person of whom he knows so little, with whom he has scarcely exchanged a couple of words? Wait, young man, examine, observe. You do not even know who our hosts may be, and to hear you talk one would think the house was your own.